Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Scott Groves, after some technical difficulties, we were able to get started here with my friend and jiu-jitsu mate, Julian Erosa. And Julian's in the UFC. He is a featherweight, 145 pounds. There is no chance he's currently walking around at 145 pounds. So we're going to get into that. And the reason that I want to interview him is because at looking at his Wikipedia page and his history, like 14 years of pro fighting. And what I can say from your record is you are game for anything. Like, I'll fight anytime, anywhere, short notice, don't give a shit. Like, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but you really strike me as that, like, I'll take anything, anywhere, and, like, I just fight for a living. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, there's sometimes there's a little bit of, you can be detrimental to your career doing that, but I think that's kind of the fighter mentality. You want to be, as ready as possible at any given time. But fighting is the fun part. It's all the other stuff. It's the hard work, the training day in and day out, the weight cuts and these kind of things. That's hard. So we're always itching to fight. Like, if I could just fight, if it was like how the Thais do it over in Thailand where they fight every weekend, like, I would kind of prefer that because, like, just the day in and day out, just grinding it out and, working your butt off and getting beat up like every day. That's like the hard thing about it. It's like you might have or you might be in limbo between fights, right? You don't have a fight camp, but you're just training your ass off, and you wake up in the morning and you're sore shit, and you don't want to get up and go. You're like, you kind of lose. Some people lose the reason why they're gonna go train that day because you're tired. You don't have a fight coming up. People want to just take the day off, and it's easy to do that when you don't have a goal at the end. The carrot dangling. And so for me, it's like if I fought more, I want to fight as regularly as possible, but sometimes it can be detrimental. Like when my second stint in the UFC, I'm sure we'll probably get more into this, but I've been hired and fired from the UFC probably more than most. And
yeah, I want to hear what that's like.
Yeah, so the second time I got hired to the UFC, they my manager Jason House had offered me a fight. It was like a 3-week notice against Devontae Smith, up a weight class, a guy who was 8-1, eight finishes, like eight knockout finishes I think he had, and they were all like first round finishes. And he's like, well, we can wait and get you a featherweight fight, or you can take this fight in Colorado in about 3.5 weeks. And I was like, let's fucking do it. Like, I'll fight him. Like, I'll fight anybody. And went out there and got knocked out by a guy who usually knocks people out. And that was one of those times where it's like I should have been a bit smarter about the situation.
Yeah.
And my eagerness and my willingness to fight was kind of put me in a bad spot, specifically in that fight and a couple other times as well. But you learn from those mistakes. And now it's like my third stint in the UFC. I've been a bit smarter about, taking fights when I have to and when I don't have to. I'm in a good spot with the UFC, so I can be a bit more choosy about times, dates, who I'm fighting and stuff like that. Before, sometimes you feel like you're almost like obligated to take a fight.
Yeah.
But, I don't necessarily feel obligated when I take fights. I'm just excited to fight, so I just want to go out there and do it. And sometimes, like I said, it can be detrimental to your career. And luckily for me, I've been given a third opportunity with the UFC, and I've done, I've been able to capitalize on that.
Well, I can tell you as a fight fan, I love fighters like you because I grew up in an era where boxing got totally ruined because people wouldn't take the fight for years, for decades. Mayweather and Pacquiao should have fought 10 years earlier than they did. And I've brought this up so many times on the podcast that holding on and trying to protect the record and trying to manage the fighter to a undefeated record completely ruined the sport of boxing. UFC also had something to do with that by taking away a lot of the fan base. But I think it's because of fighters like you that will step in on short notice and put up a good fight, no matter even if they're like, hey, 3 weeks up a weight class against a killer. Are you game? And you're like, yeah, of course I'm game. I like to fight. I like a payday. I think that's what makes the UFC exciting and unpredictable.
Yeah, 100%. And
not that I want to see you get knocked out or anything like that on short notice, but
I always try to, I tell up-and-coming fighters, because I'm 35 years old, so I've been around the game a long time. I've done it for 14 years. I have a lot of fights, 40-plus professional fights and 10 amateur fights.
41 on Wikipedia.
Yeah, I have 41 professional fights and 10 amateur fights. But what I always try to tell people, especially up-and-coming fighters, is you got to remember why you did it. Why'd you start doing it? And Coach Casey used to say this all the time. There was a time where you used to pay to go get your butt kicked, right? And so once you start getting paid to get your butt kicked, you can't change your mindset on it. You still have to remember that you love to do this, and that's why you're here. People, once you start getting paid the type of money people get paid in the UFC and some of the big organizations, you start to think about it like a job, and jobs feel like obligations, and they start feeling like something that you don't necessarily want to do, but you have to do. So something I like to do is, every so often, just try to remember in my own head and like in my own mind and why I'm doing these things. And, obviously when, I have a kid, I have a wife, and you start to grow, you start to mature over time. So your reasons start to change a little bit, but the main reason why you started doing something should have been, should maintain all the way through. And once I feel like the fun of fighting, has left me and why I do it, then I think I'm going to stop doing it at that point.
Hey there, Scott Groves with a quick interruption to the podcast. Sorry about that, but I just want to take a quick minute to announce our sponsors here for the podcast, and that sponsor is me, Scott Groves. It's actually the revenue that we generate through doing mortgages here at Neo Home Loans, and the money that we generate from the coaching program that I run, Consolidated Coaching for Loan Officers, coaching by loan officers for loan officers, that helps support this podcast. I really started this in 2021 as a passion project during COVID, and we're excited to bring you a new episode every week, but this only happens if I'm making money in my real full-time job. So please, if you or somebody you know is looking to buy, sell, or refinance a house, our team is licensed in almost every state in the country. And if you know a loan officer who's looking for sales coaching, personal development coaching, lead generation coaching, please, please, please get in touch with us. Scott at the Scott Groves team. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to support our other endeavors, which is mortgage financing and loan officer coaching, which allows this podcast to exist. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. So I try to think of like what you guys go through, because you are a extremely active fighter. Like you said, 41 plus 10 amateurs over 15 years. That's, God, I can't even do math right now. 51 divided by 15. That's, 3.5, 4 fights a year. Yeah. That's super active for a combat sport, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's some years, my first year as a professional, I fought 5, maybe almost, I think it was 6 times in like 14 months. Oh, but that was because, it's the regional scene. There's a lot less. It's a lot less political in the regional scene and the smaller shows, and then also you're not worried about certain things. But and also I had just become a pro, so like everybody's just trying to fight. And this was also, when I turned professional like 2010, so 15 years ago or 14 years ago. And it was a whole different sport back then. There was, we were a half a step above street fighting, really, and so people were just down to do it. And like I said, like we were just like everybody was like this, especially from the Northwest. Everybody was just wanting to fight. Like guys that weren't training were still fighting. They just didn't care. Like they were just down to fight. Nowadays, you have guys that are like a purple belt. And they have, I'm gonna do my first amateur fight. I'm like, dude, if I fought you when I was an amateur, I would have got, beat up bad. I would have no idea what you were doing to me, because I was like I started training and I had my first amateur fight 3 months after that. And then,
whoa, back up. You had your first amateur fight. You put the gloves on, got into a cage, and were willing to like knock somebody out or knock somebody out. Wait, 90 days?
Yeah.
Are you a psycho?
Well, it's funny because like I'm from a small town in Washington State, Yakima, and I walked into this MMA gym after I'd watched UFC with my father and the WEC back then, because the WEC was the free fights that you watched, and then every 3 months was a UFC pay-per-view or whatever. And so we'd watch the WEC. My dad was like, "Hey, you look at that Donald Cerrone guy. You look just like that guy. Maybe you should try this stuff." And I was like, I don't know. I'd gotten to some street fights, and I was like, maybe I'll give it a shot. So I went to the MMA gym that we had in town, and the very first thing I asked him was like, "Hey, like, when can I fight?" And that's like the first question I had, because I just wanted to fight. I was down to fight. And he was like, well, you got to train and we'll figure it out. I'm like, well, how much?
Did you have a boxing background or a karate background or a wrestling background or anything?
No.
You had no combat sports, and the first day you walk into an MMA gym, you're like, so when do I get to fight?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how, it went. And he was like, well, you got to start training first.
Did you have brain damage as a kid or something? Like, this is not normal.
I was just, what it was, I was a skateboarder, and, we got into some scraps at the skate park, and I feel like the normal person, if someone who hasn't trained before, is a little bit delusional in how fighting works, right? Like I got into some street fights, and I won most of the fights that I was in the street. I mean, all of them probably, but there's no judges, there's no, refs
Right.
there. And they only last for a couple of minutes because after a couple of minutes, everybody kind of gets, you get broken up or you guys are tired or whatever the situation is.
Yeah, you fall on the ground. Nobody knows what they're doing.
And I was fantastic at it. I was a scrappy kid. I was a bit smaller, but I was a scrappy skateboarder kid. And I was like, so what? I went in there. I'm like, I had the confidence that I could fight right now. Like I fight dudes. I already fought dudes and I beat them. Like, so I thought that, me being a delusional person that hadn't been training yet about fighting, went in there thinking that I could fight. And I got humbled pretty quickly on. He's like, well, come train with us. And, you get your butt kicked for the first, probably how it is, even jiu-jitsu, like showing up the first, handful of months, you're like, your mind gets blown by how helpless you feel under some certain people. And especially people that, like, a lot of people that don't even look the part, right? Like,
right.
You're like, oh, this guy's a good, like, I'll smash this guy, and you start rolling with him. You're like, holy crap, this guy's really good. And that's kind of how it was with me, first off training. And this is, like I said, this is a long time ago. We're talking about 16, 17 years ago. Fighting was a bit more underground at the time as well. And, but yeah, just, got beat up a couple of times in the gym and was like, wow, this is amazing. I want to do this. It's an acquired taste. Getting punched in the face is like, some people don't like mustard, some people don't like getting punched in the face. I enjoy it. And so that's, one thing led to another, and became pretty good at it. I was 10-0 as an amateur, turned professional about a year and a half, 2 years into.
What do amateur fights look like? Because I'm thinking about this, and like obviously there's levels to everything, right? Yeah. I have a friend who was a world-class high school basketball player. He played for Loyola Marymount, and he's like, dude, I was a bench warmer at Loyola Marymount. They put me in to play this guy, Ronnie Turioff, who ended up playing on the Lakers for a couple seasons. Yeah. He dominated everybody. And Ronnie Turioff was lucky to be a bench warmer in the NBA. So it's like you can see the levels in athleticism.
Yes.
When you're going in there to fight an amateur fight, are you going in against some, 35-year-old dad of 3 who just wants to have one fight for his Instagram? Well, I guess Instagram wasn't around 15, 16 years ago.
MySpace, baby.
MySpace, yeah, exactly. But what was amateur fighting? I mean, did you ever go into the ring being like, oh, I'm going to kill this guy? Or
no, it's all relative, right? Like, this goes along with everything, right? Basketball's been around for
100 years,
freaking long that those levels have obviously plateaued over so many years because of it's been around so long. MMA, when I first started fighting MMA, it was still pretty underground. There was it's a whole lot more mainstream than it was back then, and so fighting amateur, like, back when it was like I said, it was a half a step above street fighting. Like, it was guys who barely kind of trained. Where I was from in Washington, the lower valley is what we call it. Wrestling was very prevalent. So you had a lot of wrestlers that would kind of transition over. But, more often than not, it was just a couple of guys that were, half a step above a bar fight, that were going to get in there and do it.
There's a lot of fighters that have come from that valley, right? Like Misha Tate, Brian Caraway.
Yeah.
A lot of people who have made it in the UFC came from the wrestling background.
Gustavo Lopez was there as well. And, I mean, even the Northwest, like Michael Chiesa is from Spokane. Brady as well. He's in the UFC right now. He's a 35er. He's from Spokane as well. Rick Little has a gym down in Spokane that we have. Julian Peña's from there as well.
Do you guys have nothing to do in Washington except for fight?
No, we have a lot to do up there, actually. I mean, you think being Washington such a blue state, you think there wouldn't be very many fighters coming over there, but east of the mountains we're a bit more red over there, and I think a lot of us, you just got a lot of kind of country kids that fight a lot. I wasn't necessarily a country kid, but there's, just like anywhere else, it's all relative. Like, if you were on the west side of the mountains, it was a bit more,
a little bit more hippie.
Yeah, more city, city life. But where I was from, smaller town, we got into, like I said, being a skateboarder at the skate park, you figure you find these things out. Nowadays it's a bit different. I bet you at the skate parks here they're not getting into fights, and then you're worried about other kids having guns and knives and weapons and stuff. But back when I was a kid growing up, you didn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. So kids got in fights, and that was just kind of that was the law of the land at the skate park. You and another kid didn't like each other, fight it out, and then we'll skate later.
Yeah,
it's just kind of how it worked. And so, but yeah, like I think there's a decent amount of Northwest fighters that are still actually doing it pretty well today. I mean, Chiesa just fought, and Chase Hooper is from Washington as well. I think he's on a different side. Demetrius Johnson.
He's a Washington guy?
I don't know if he was born in Washington, but he was training. He's trained out there forever with Matt Hume.
probably the best who's ever done it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, straight up. Like, yeah, one of the best to ever do it. And I think he just got a little bit of a, underrepresented just because of his weight class. You know, he's just a small guy. 25ers aren't the most, for whatever reason, they're like the most exciting guys, but kind of like the most underappreciated because people like, I don't know what it is. Maybe they just don't have that knockout power because like, people love the heavyweights because at any given point, someone get knocked out. Flyweights, those guys, if you're really into technical fighting, they're like the best at it.
Right.
But the average fan doesn't like to watch the technical stuff. They just want to see guys get knocked out, you know? So,
right.
I think they just get underappreciated. And Demetrius Johnson is one of those guys who I think got a little bit underappreciated, but he was literally one of the best in the world.
So what does your amateur career look like? I mean, are you doing a job at this point? Are you still in high school or college, or like what do you like? What does your day look like when you're an amateur?
I was into some things.
You were doing some stuff.
I was doing some. I wasn't the best kid. I wasn't the worst kid. I was relatively good in school. Actually, pretty good in school. I was going to college after high school. I was wanting to be an accountant. My mom was an accountant, so I was going to try to follow her steps. And so I was.
This job's really close to it, guys.
Yeah. Basically the same thing. I just realized after doing a little bit of college for it, I was like, man, this shit's so boring. Like, that's just not my personality. I was good at it. Like I've always been really good with numbers, but just too boring for me. And but I was a snowboarder, skateboarder. I sold weed when I was a kid, you know. I actually got in some trouble for that. But that was
all legal now, so it doesn't matter.
I know. It's like one of those things that's just kind of stupid, like in hindsight. And but yeah, I was just kind of, just the average, teenage kid, and I just, kind of fell into it. And luckily for me, my mom was very supportive of everything that I did, and so besides selling weed, so she was okay with me just living at home and kind of chasing the dream. And I would say after the, even with my amateur career, I mean, like 16 years, probably the last 4 or 5 years maybe is when you actually make any kind of substantial money to make it worth it. It's like there was a whole decade plus of time that I did this for nothing. I was just living at my mom's house doing it, moved out to Vegas for a while too, and was just like paycheck to paycheck. I was Uber driving. My wife was working, job to job and trying to figure things out. And, there was a couple of times I was close to leaving Vegas. My second stint in the UFC, I went 0-3. And they cut me again. I was like, there's no way they're going to have me back. And so I was like...
And correct me if I'm wrong, pretty much like UFC and Bellator is the only place to make money, like real money, like sustainable career money.
Well, I mean, there's some... PFL is...
PFL, yeah.
PFL will pay you some money. There's that new GFL, I think it just came out. And they're talking about giving fighters benefits and stuff, but that's like very new. That's like, I just seen it today. But there's a couple of other, organizations, like foreign organizations you can go to and possibly make okay money. But I mean, even Pantoja is a good example of it. He's the champion, and he talks about doing Uber Eats, even fighting as a champion, or leading up to his championship fights, or his first championship fight. And even for me, like when I was in the UFC, I was still Uber driving on the side just to make money. Like, you're only one fight away from possibly getting cut. I mean, and with the UFC and some of these big organizations, the contracts are one-way contracts. So it's like you're attached to the contract, but if they want to just cut you, then they'll cut you. Even if you sign a 3-fight contract, it's stipulated in there that if they want to cut you at any time, they can still cut you. So, so it's like, it's not like you can get a 3-fight, 4-fight contract and go out there and lose 4 in a row or 3 in a row and have that 4th fight still. They'll cut you they can cut you at any given time. So I'm very blessed that I'm still able to fight for the UFC and that I have a style that extends my job security a little bit more. Some of the guys that are a bit boring, you hear about guys that get cut with like pretty good records in the UFC, but they're just kind of boring fighters in the UFC, or maybe they rub the UFC the wrong way or something. For me, I've always been a yes man, a company man. And not only that, I'm a guy who's like kill or be killed. Like, I could fight a little smarter sometimes.
I didn't want to say it, but like when you go in the ring, like something bad's going to happen to someone.
Yeah. And it comes with the territory. And luckily for me, I've been able to be on the right side of things a bit more, especially my third stint. And so, but yeah, with the contracts, it's like, any given day you can be cut. And so you're always trying to think about what possibly could be the next thing for me. And, you know, sometimes it's a bad mindset to have. Like, obviously you want to believe in yourself 100%, but when you have things, you know, kids, you know, family and, you know, obligations, your priorities start to switch around a little bit. And so like, but to see a guy like Pantoja who said publicly that he was an Uber Eats driver, you know, and someone had posted him and tagged him on on their Instagram and said, but freaking Uber Eats driver is the UFC champion. Like, it's crazy. And it's like, but you know, it's commendable for a guy like him to, you know, worry about, you know, his family and if it, you know, make sure that he has other plans besides just fighting. Cause sometimes fighting's not going to always cover the bills.
Yeah. So if we think about those amateur fights, like what does it look like? Because, you know, if we're thinking 16 years ago, there wasn't the amazing, well-rounded fighters. Like I imagine George St. Pierre is just starting to get into the UFC. Yeah. So it's like, you're an amateur, you have no combat sport background. Although I've got to think snowboarding and skateboarding, taking a lot of spills, taking a lot of physical contact to the body, that probably had to help a little bit. Well, like you were just used to getting like roughed up, usually by the ground. But
yeah, you know, it helps out with some of that kind of thing, those kind of things. But also one of the things that it helped me out with was people have a lot of good hand-eye coordination. I felt like I had good like leg-eye coordination, like just because I skateboard a lot, snowboard a lot.
Let me throw that mic in a little bit closer.
Oh yeah. And so I think it helped me out athletically just to be able to figure, you know, just to be able to use my feet and my legs a bit better than most average guys. But I mean, like people have advantages coming from wrestling, coming from boxing. So like you pick and choose your advantages and you take them with you. You know, like I mean, for me, I started MMA from no combatives at all at 18, and you know I'm in the UFC and I've been in the UFC for a long time. And if you're a kid now and you try to chase the dream of being in the UFC at 18, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, you got Raul Rosas, who's in the UFC at 18 or 17, you know, fought contenders at 17 or whatever.
Dude, I look at some of these kids that are like 12, 13, 14 years old in the gym. They've been training under Andy for 5 years. They're world-class grapplers at 13 or 14 years old. Some of those guys, I'm like, dude, please do not come find me after you go through puberty because you're going to fuck me up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I talk to kids all the time. Like, there's kids that train under Andy for, you know, a few years. And I'm like, and they're only blue belts. And I'm like, you as a blue belt would beat the black belts that I knew back when I was first grappling. Like when I first started picking it up and trying to figure it out, you're better than those guys. And like, you know, but that's just how all sports evolve, right? And everything evolves. Like, you know, every generation gets better and better and better, and the younger and younger. And then next thing you know, these kids at 12-year-old, I mean, I don't know if you know much about skateboarding, but Tony Hawk was the first one to do a 900 on a vert ramp. Now we have there's like a 9-year-old kid who does it. It's like Tony Hawk did it like, you know, 25 years ago or whatever it was. And now you got kids within a pretty small span of time being able to do it at like under 10 years old. You're like, this is insane. It's same with grappling, same with, you know, all the sports.
Yeah. And since you didn't have a fight background and you were coming in as just like a unmolded piece of clay, did you start with striking? Did you start with kicking? Did you start with wrestling, jiu-jitsu? Like, I obviously know you from our time together at the jiu-jitsu gym, but what did you decide was going to be your style? Or is it just this hodgepodge of like, I've put together a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, and like, let's go fight and see what happens?
Yeah, I mean, that's really kind of how it happens, right? You kind of fall in love with certain techniques and things, and then you just kind of work on those things, and then you just...
Steal another one of your beers there, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Drink them all.
Yeah. By the way, I'm excited. You're the first fighter I've had in here besides Tom Lawler, who's retired, who will drink beer. So
what? No word, man. That's crazy. What was it?
Style of fighting. How did your style like morph over time?
Well, you know, me being a long, lanky featherweight. I mean, when I first started as amateur, I was fighting at 55.
Give people the stats. Like, how big are you? How tall are you? Because
I'm 6'1". I would say the average featherweight is probably about 5'8", and so I'm about almost half a foot taller than that. I mean, there's a couple outliers as well. I mean, Sean Woodson, the kid I fought on the 6 days notice or 3 days notice in the UFC to get my job back for the third time. He's 6'2.5", so he's even taller than me, which is pretty crazy to do.
6'2.5" at 145 pounds.
Yeah, he's he's missing it in his legs a little bit, and he's a bit skinny. But yeah, I'm 6'1". I fight at 145. So for me, it's always been length has always been my advantage, and so striking's always been good. But in grappling that can help as well. You know, we got different different, lengths and leverages on the ground as well. So, but, for me throughout my career, I kind of like hyper focus on different things. Like at first I love striking. I just love to fight. And so like if you love to fight, striking you falls right into your game plan. And so that was always kind of my thing. And then, then for like a handful of years, I got really, really into jiu-jitsu and just really trying to work my jiu-jitsu. And that was kind of right when I moved to Vegas. And it's funny because when I first moved to Vegas, I hadn't been guillotined in like 4 or 5 years. And Brian Caraway was a guy who I was training with back at home. And he used to guillotine me all the time. And I used to, I figured out my defense very well because he used to do it 1,000 times to me. So when you get choked 1,000 times, you start to figure out how not to get choked anymore. And so with that specific choke, and came to Vegas, and the first time I trained with Andy Varela, he one-arm guillotined me like two or three times in like a 5-minute round. And I was like, that was fucking crazy. Like, I don't know what he's doing or what's going on with this guy, but I need to train with him because he's like, he obviously knows what's going on. Like, and I hadn't been choked with a guillotine for like 5 or 6 years, and he did it within like a 5-minute round multiple times. And I was like, wow, this guy's really good. And so I kind of fell in love with jiu-jitsu kind of right at that point. I mean, I obviously had to be good at everything.
Right.
But once I moved to Vegas, I kind of got hyper focused on jiu-jitsu, and then people just kind of move to the different things. I enjoy all of it. I enjoy all the practices. Some people are like, oh, I fucking hate wrestling practice, or I hate sparring, or I hate grappling, or I hate the cardio. I love it all. I mean, I enjoy it all. And I feel like that just comes with maturity.
Yeah, your Instagram is like on your free time, you go like trail running. And I'm like, I know this dude did like pads this morning, weightlifting in the afternoon. I saw him at like the 11 a.m. or the 6 p.m. jiu-jitsu class. And I'm like, how the fuck does this guy have energy to just go on an 11-mile trail run for fun? Like, that's fun for you, even after having to train for a living?
You don't, I mean, it's one of those things where like, even with fighting, like I say, it's an acquired taste. Like, people probably wonder why do you go spar? Why do you box? Or why do you get punched in the face? Why do you like to fight? Why do you like to run? It's the same kind of concept for me. You get the endorphins going, and it's like, it's more of like a freeing thing. It's one of those things I can do that's hard work without necessarily having to think about it. I can just do it, and kind of just it's like almost my meditation. I enjoy running, and in Vegas, there's a lot of good trail running out here, so I can do that, and it can be enjoyable for me. If I hop on a treadmill, it's not as enjoyable. If I hop on just the road, it's not as enjoyable. But go trail running in Vegas, there's a lot of cool trails to run, and it kind of it goes by like, it's one of those things that goes by because you're having so much fun. Not most people are having fun, but for me, it's fun. I enjoy the suffrage of the running. I enjoy the suffrage of training, and I really do enjoy everything that training brings me. Because there's a lot of guys out there that will get ready for eight week fight camp, and then you just won't see them for a while, and then you'll see them. Oh, they got to fight, so they come back in the gym, and then for another 8 weeks they fight, and then you don't see them again. For me, I train all year round. If I don't have a fight, I'm always training. But it's because I really do enjoy it. Like if I had to sit at home, I'd probably go crazy,
Is that why the UFC has invited you back? Actually, let's just talk about the story getting into the UFC. So you have your 10 amateur fights. You decide to go pro. Is that like a conversation with your coach, or is that one day somebody from a promotion sees you in an amateur fight and they're like, hey, we'll give you $500 if you'll go pro? Because that's the definition of pro, right? As soon as you take money for a fight, you're now a pro. You can't go backwards. Like, what did that transition for you look like from amateur to pro? Was it just dumb luck? Somebody offered you $500, or was it like a plan?
So I was lucky in the sense that my coach was a promoter and matchmaker for a pro show in the Northwest. And actually one of the better pro shows probably in the country. It's called Cageport. It was at the Emerald Queen Casino, but I can't remember if they moved to a different place or not. Oh, I think the casino actually built a different venue. But so I was lucky. After 10 amateur fights, my coach was like, hey, like, I know some pros that you could beat. Like, you want to make some money doing this? And it was completely just a hobby for me. So I was like, oh, all right, well, how much are you going to pay me? Oh, we're going to pay you $400 to show and $400 to win. So $800 altogether. Plus they'll pay you like, they'll give you like food vouchers or whatever, and give you a hotel for a couple of nights. I'm like, hell yeah, I was getting paid $0 before, so let's just do it. And it was literally as easy as it was for me. I was just like, screw it, like, you're going to pay me something, I'll do it. And, did it. I I was 10-0 as an amateur, and then I was 9-0 as a professional before my first loss. So, and I actually wish I would have taken a loss earlier on in my career, because I felt kind of invincible, and that's always good to have that confidence, but I didn't know how to lose. And the first time I lost, I was kind of confused in there, because I was like, this guy's beating me. I didn't know how to really beat him. And it was like, I was playing checkers and he was kind of playing chess with me at the time. And it kind of threw me off. And I'm like, this is my 20th fight. Like I shouldn't have to learn this now. Like this should have been something I learned earlier on. But I mean, for me, I was just one of those guys that was so scrappy that was always able to figure out some way to win. But, so yeah, I just started fighting as a professional and was 9-0, lost my first pro fight on my 10th fight. And then, fought, I think I was 14-2, so I lost another fight, but won 5 more, and then the Ultimate Fighter at 155. You know what? Before that, actually, I was gonna try out for the live season that Chiesa was on, but I had gotten busted for bringing marijuana from California to Washington, and I had a felony on my name, and so and I was actually going through the court stuff at that time, and my coach was like, "Hey, we should try out for the Ultimate Fighter." Like, I think at the time I was like 10-2 or something, and I was like, "I can't do it." Like I'm in trouble. I don't want to tell him, and then I had to tell him because of the whole situation. And so I ended up not trying out for that season because it would have made no sense to do it because they weren't going to accept me anyways. And then that season passed, and other seasons passed, and then I was on a 4-fight win streak, won 2 belts at the promotion that I was fighting at, the Cage Sport, under my coach, and it was the 55 and 45 belt. And then the UFC was having Ultimate Fighter tryouts here in Vegas, and at 155 and 170, and I tried out for that one. It was the European versus American, probably the most popular season because it was right when Conor McGregor was just becoming a superstar. It was him on one side, the Europeans versus the Americans, Uriah Faber. And luckily for me, my record was 14-2. I fought a lot of good guys, fought at 45 and 55. And
was one of those 2 losses to Patty?
No, not then.
Okay.
Then. I fought Patty after that. So
because I was able to scrounge up in preparation for this interview.
Yes.
I was able to scrounge up a couple of those rounds.
Yeah.
And you fought Patty I can't say his last name.
Pemlin.
And you beat him, man.
Yeah,
it was a controversial decision. Like I'll say it so you don't have to.
No, it's all good. No, he knows. Everybody knows. I actually gained a lot of fan base from people over in Europe because of that fight. So even though I lost, it brought a lot of recognition to me, and it just brought a lot of fan base from over there. So, but yeah, I was 14-2, tried out for the Ultimate Fighter, coming off 4 wins.
What does a tryout look like? I mean, are they looking, because obviously they got to put together a reality show, right? So you got to have some personality, you have to have the look, but like obviously there's fight skill, then there's personality. What does a tryout, quote unquote, look like for the Ultimate Fighter?
Really, the tryout situation that I was doing, now I think they even do Zoom meetings. Like they'll just like, so guys don't have to travel from wherever they're from. They'll just do a Zoom meeting. Basically, the tryouts that we did, it had nothing to do with the pad. We literally did pads for 30 seconds. We grappled for 30 seconds. Like, no joke. Like, because there were so many guys there. We grappled for that much. We did pads for that much. And very minimal of physical stuff they see. And they only wanted time. I feel like they only wanted time to kill so they could look at our records, see who we fought, and if we'd be good contestants to be, like, on the show fight-wise. And then once they weeded out all the bullshit guys that were just like, only had a few fights, because you have to have a winning record with 3 pro fights. So you had to be at least 2-1 as a pro to get on the show. So once they weed all the guys that are just there that with a few fights that just aren't going to cut it.
Yeah, they're 4-2 at the LA County Fair or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. They're not really worried about they'll cut all those guys. Once they get to the main bunch of guys that actually have some skill sets and have good records and an ability to fight, then you go to the producers and they filter you through there. They want to see you have a little bit of, they want to see what your energy is like. They want to see what your characteristics are like and your personality. And then they weed you from there as well. And then also they have, I would say, maybe 5 to 10 guys extra they have because of if you can't pass a physical for whatever reason, or if something happens, or legalities, whatever the situation might be. There's some guys that won't be able to make it, so they'll end up cutting those guys even later down the line after doing medicals and stuff. But Honestly, it was literally just like it was just a hangout session. They just wanted to see what your record was. I was coming off of 4 wins and I won 2 belts at 2 different weight classes, and so it was a prime time for me to try out for the Ultimate Fighter. And my record was 14-2. I had more fights than most of the guys trying out, so I was a bit more of a veteran compared to those guys, but it didn't hurt me in any sense. I can't. It's funny is one of the people was Juliana Pena that was there watching it, and she knew before everybody else knew, and she was texting somebody that was with us, hanging out with us, and would be like, "Oh yeah, Julian made it to the next cut. Oh yeah, Julian made it to the next cut. Oh yeah, Julian." So like it just kept going like that. I was like, so I knew before they were even cutting guys, and then the final cut she had no idea about because I think she had left or whatever the situation was. So I was just sitting there, and they finally called my name for the final cut.
What did it end up being, like 8-on-8 or something like that, or
16-on-16?
16-on-16. Oh, fuck, that's a big season.
Yeah. So, well, what happened was they were going to do 2 seasons. Most seasons are 2 weight classes. This season, the 170 guys, they ended up throwing them out because there wasn't enough talent, I guess, in the 170 pounders. But there were so many 55ers that showed up, and so many 70 pounders that are actually 55ers. That they said that the most talented 70 pounders that showed up could also make 55 because I could make 45 and 55. So there was a lot of guys that were dual weight class guys. And so they ended up just cutting the 70 pounders and said, we're just going to do a big season of all 55ers. And we had to fight to get in the house. And most seasons don't do that anymore. So we had to fight. So they did 16 Americans, 16 Europeans. Americans had to fight Americans to get in the house. Europeans had to fight Europeans to get in the house. And, to get in the house after you fought would have been 8-8. So 16 guys, 8-8. And I actually fought, I think my season was probably the most fights you had to win the whole season. I was 3-1, and I didn't even fight the finale. Like I wasn't even.
So you won your first 3 fights to stay on the season.
Yeah.
And then lost in the semifinals.
Yes, basically. Yeah, exactly. And, that was a whole convoluted situation in itself. So Conor McGregor was one of the coaches, and obviously at the time, one of his best friend was Artem Lobov. And so Artem Lobov fought to get in the house against a guy named Mehdi Baghdad. Lost to Mehdi Baghdad. And if you lose, you don't get in the house. But it's Conor's best friend, and he was a superstar, or he was just becoming a superstar. And so he basically had a bit more pull than anybody else. If anybody else lost on that side, they wouldn't have got an extra opportunity. So all 8 of us get, to the house, all the 8 Europeans and 8 Americans. We were there for like a couple of days already. Then Dana White brings us out and says, hey, there was a couple guys that fought to get in the house that did so well. They lost their fights, but they did so well that we want to bring them back. So we're going to bring back Artem Lobov. They brought him back, and to even the teams out, they brought Johnny Nunez. And so now it was 9-9. So that was weird anyways, because like now 9 versus 9 makes 9 winners. That's not even. So you can't.
Right. You can't have a real tournament.
Yeah, the bracket gets fucked up anyways. And so that was kind of weird anyway. So not only did you have to win, but you had to be, you didn't want to be the most boring winner, because if you won at the 9-9, if you won, if you were the most boring winner, you also got cut. So it was just a whole convoluted thing. But anyway, so I beat my guy to get in. Artem lost his guy to get in to Mehdi. I fought Mehdi. They set me up with Mehdi because they thought Mehdi was going to just maul me. I ended up beating Mehdi Baghdad, who beat Artem. And then I ended up beating another guy. And then Artem won his way up. And then me and Artem fought, and he knocked me out. And so it was one of those things like if that didn't happen, I might have won the season. I mean, who knows? Maybe I didn't win the season. Yeah, anything could have happened. There's a lot of weird, convoluted stuff that had happened in that season. But you never know what the situation might have happened.
Yeah.
And he got a second chance. I didn't get a second chance. I got knocked out by him, and they didn't call me back to go to the finale. And so actually the guy who ended up winning my season was Ryan Hall, who actually got beat. He won his first 2 fights. Then he got beat by Saul Rogers, and they brought him back because Saul Rogers was supposed to fight the finale, but he had some legalities going on back in Europe that he didn't say anything about. Yeah, so a lot of crazy stuff had happened on that season. So I got kind of runner-up. Me and another kid named Marcin fought for basically the 3rd place. I beat him, got my contract with the UFC.
So how does that work? Because when the Ultimate Fighter was advertised, it was like, hey, you got to fight your way into the house. Then you got to win. If you win this whole thing, you win a UFC contract. That's the big grand prize.
Yeah.
But it seems like a ton of guys, people who have interviewed like Tom Lawler, they came in second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever. But they were interesting enough and they showed enough promise where the UFC's like, well, we got to get fighters from somewhere. Why not pull from our own show some people that might have some built-in fan base? So did they come to you when you lost and say, hey, don't worry, bro, you're going to get a contract anyway? Or did you have to finish out the season and you're kind of on pins and needles? Or like, how does that work before you get the big news that you're in the game?
Well, luckily for me, the day that I lost was the semifinals. So the day that I lost to Artem Lobov was the day they released us, that night. So like I was training the entire time, which was amazing because I was focused. I was training the entire time. The guys I feel bad for were the guys that lost right out the gate. Like right when we get in the house, there was some of the guys that lost the first week. We were there for 7 weeks. So you got guys that were sitting there just for like 6 weeks, just praying and hoping that they might get, someone gets injured, they could hop in, which a couple guys did.
Because the whole team stays to train together, right?
Yeah.
Even if you lose.
Yeah. So if you lose, you got to stay in the house. And Dana White threw us a pool party with a bunch of, I think they were strippers from like Crazy Horse or something. But there was a lot of guys, that were, drinking, having a good time. And,
but you got to still make weight.
I was focused, I was focused the entire time. There was a couple of times I had a couple of beverages on the show, but everybody was kind of getting a little bit of getting a little cagey, I would say. And, we are all having a good time, but, it was, I felt bad for the guys because I would see it on their face all the time. Like, it just seemed like they were happy for us. Like they were happy for the other guys on our side. And they were, they had a stake in the game in the sense of like it was Europeans versus Americans. And so like, even if you're an American that got knocked out early, you're still there for your teammates. And you're like, man, you're just pushing, you're hoping you get another opportunity, but you can always, I felt like I got a little bit of weird tension through some guys that had lost and had to be on the show for the 4, 5, 6 weeks longer. Without any kind of hope to be in the UFC. So you're kind of just stuck. They were paying us a little bit of money. So like, I think that's why most of the guys will just stay there anyways. But it was disheartening for those guys for sure. For me, I got knocked out, but then right after that, literally like hours later, Dana White takes us to the strip club, takes us to dinner. So like, it's already out of my mind. I know I'm going home the next day. I'm going to see my wife, so like, I'm chill about it. Like it's whatever, but I wasn't. They had contacted me and said I was going to fight on the finale, on the undercard. Not obviously for the gold of the Ultimate Fighter, but that I could fight basically for third place. And it was in my contract stipulated that if I won that fight, I would get contracted to the UFC. So I don't know if it's just stipulated on what season is going on and what kind of things they have going on. I know it's different than it is now. Like I did Ultimate Fighter 9 years ago, so like it's different now than it was back then. But I was under the impression that if I won that fight, I was going to get contracted, and I won that fight. Luckily, by split decision, it was a close fight. Me and Marcin had a war, and I almost dark-stroked him a couple times in my mind. Afterwards, he said it wasn't close, but I heard him gargling, and I didn't know how to dark-stroke as good as I do now. But he said it wasn't close, but I won by a split decision.
Didn't you put your most recent opponent to sleep with a darts opponent?
No, it was a guillotine. I got him with a guillotine. He tapped. Most guys don't go to sleep nowadays, which is such a weird thing to me. Like, I've never been submitted in fighting. So 51 fights, never been submitted. And I take pride in that because, and Casey always says it. Casey used to say this to us all the time. It's like, he was talking about a fighter he was cornering one time and how he got choked out unconscious. And after the fight, he was like, oh, that motherfucker didn't make me tap. I didn't submit. My body, because there's a little bit of pride in that, right? Like if you have me in a choke, obviously if you have my heel and you're gonna rip my knee out, I got to think about my career and the longevity of it. And 35, if someone gets me in a deep heel hook and I know my knee's about to pop, I'll probably tap because
not worth it.
It's not worth it to go through the surgery and have to deal with that. But if you have my neck and you're gonna put me to sleep, man, I'd rather wake up and have the ref tell me what just happened than to know that I tapped and that's what stopped the fight. And so it's always like a surprise to me when you see some of these world-class fighters fighting at the tippy top. I mean, Dracus du Plessis choked out Adesanya, and it's like, man, if I'm at the top of the top, the cream of the crop, and you're going to put a choke on me, the ref's going to wake me up. I don't care. Are you going to put me out? I'm going to give everything I have because if you have energy to tap, you have energy to fight out. So, and obviously, like 90% of the time, even if you fight out, if you're trying to fight out besides tapping, you're still going to probably go out. Right. But I'd rather go out with my sword. And that's something, me being too okay with doing that has been detrimental in some sense. You know,
is your wife allowed to watch this podcast? She probably doesn't want to hear this, right?
Oh no, my wife. No, I mean, I met my wife 14 years ago, so she's been with me basically from my early pro fights. So she went to London when I fought Patty. She's watched me cut weight horribly. She's watched me almost die on the scale. She watched me get knocked out, you know, in front of millions of people.
Dude, what's it like for your wife? I should interview your wife because, like, you know, what kind of ultra supportive, amazing woman, psycho must she be to be married to a pro fighter?
You know, you know, she's not a psycho because I could see how people could correlate that. She's more naive than anything, really. My wife's so innocent, it's crazy. My wife doesn't know certain like half dirty jokes just because of how just innocent she kind of is. And but I think, you know, it's one of those things like, you know, you get used to it, and she's gotten used to watching me fight over time. And she met me as a fighter. When she first met me, she met me at a show. I wasn't fighting that night, but she knew I was a fighter. And then when we were talking and before we got together, she knew I was fighting. And then she actually was a ring girl. It's funny because
now the story comes out.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of funny because so my old coach Rich, his wife Julie had seen my wife Elena at a pizza parlor with her boyfriend at the time. And my wife's a very good looking girl. And at the time, Julie was like, man, this girl's gorgeous. Like, she went up to, and she's tall. She's long legged. And so perfect for ring girling. And Julie went up to her and was like, hey, I would like for you to ring girl. Have you ever thought about doing it? My wife's never done anything like that at the time. And her boyfriend was very opposed to it. She ended up doing it, you know, got paid $100 for the night or whatever, and got to go watch fights for free and just, you know, hold the card up. And that's when I met her and gave her my number. Oh, that's my phone. And
she heard us talking about it. She's calling you, bro.
Yeah. And so
she's like, don't tell the ring girl story. Yeah. I'm a mom now.
So long story short, so I met her that night, gave her my number. Her husband or her boyfriend at the time ripped it up. She hit me up on MySpace because that was what was prevalent.
This is how old we are.
Yes, exactly. And finally,
you know, retirement's coming up when you're talking about MySpace.
Yes, exactly. You know, it's funny. I tell people the story all the time about how we met and how this exchange happened. And they're like, MySpace, huh? I'm like, yeah, that's how long we've been together, you know? And so she reached out to me on MySpace, and one thing led to another. And, you know, she broke up with her boyfriend, ended up getting back with him. And me and her were just kind of talking and just friends for like about a year. And then she broke up with him for good, kind of high school sweethearts thing. And then after that, she, you know, I think it was my third pro fight. She was a ring girl, and it was kind of right at the time that we finally got together. And so from my third pro fight up into 41, she's been with me. So, and she's always been, like I said, just a very innocent girl and just such a sweet person. And but she's watched me. She's watched the highs of highs and the lows of lows, and so she knows. And if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't be in Vegas, you know, chasing the dream. It was her. She actually. My old coach was, you know, I've always been loyal to a fault. And my old coach, after the Ultimate Fighter, I was like, you know, I'm going to stay in Yakima. Uriah Faber from the show was like, hey, man, we really like your style. Like, you should come train with us in Sacramento. And I'm like, I probably do need to get out of a small town. And like, if I really want to chase the dream, ended up staying in Yakima for a couple of years because, like I said, I'm loyal to a fault. She was the one who kind of really pushed me to get out. And I was thinking about California or Vegas. Turned out Vegas was better just because of cost of living.
Yeah, way cheaper.
Yeah, way cheaper. And so we ended up moving out to Vegas, and you know, we've been here for 8 years now. And so and there was even a time in between where I was like debating on going back home because, you know, I got back in the UFC for the second time and went 3 losses in a row. They cut me. I was like, fuck, I mean, maybe we should go back home. I still love to fight, and I was still willing to fight. It was just I didn't like what it was doing to, or what people around me like were seeing. You know, I didn't want my loved ones to see me get knocked out and see me fail on a national stage. You know,
right?
Like, you know, people watching me do that. You know, on national television and stuff. So
Because you've experienced the highs of the highs of winning in front of a 20,000 person crowd.
Yeah.
And you've experienced the lows and lows of getting knocked the fuck out in front of 20,000 people. What kind of emotional toll does that take on you?
I always try to tell people, especially young up and comers, is never get too high on a win and never get too low on a loss, because what happens.
Yeah, you can say that, but that sounds almost impossible. It's like, as a human being looking from the other side, I get pissed off when I lose a loan.
No,
I want to throw one of my kids through the wall when somebody calls me last minute and they're like, "Hey Scott, we found a lower rate at Bank of America. I know you've been working with us for 6 months." I didn't get knocked out. So it's easy to say that, but how do you actually mentally grasp with that? Like, don't get too high on the wins and too low on the losses. Like,
I mean, that's just really just with experience, Like I got a lot of fights, and when I was younger, I would get real high on the wins, and then when I'd lose, it would be like devastating. And what I would learn from that was that
I'm gonna move this mic back a little bit. It's
of course,
hiding under your chin.
Yeah, no worries. What I learned was that when I would get too high on a win, if I lost a fight, it would just really devastate me. And so, not that a loss should not devastate you, but it shouldn't devastate you so much that you're like you're angry at the sport, or you're angry at why you're doing it. Like for me, it can get you in dark places. Like you see a lot of fighters out there that really go down a negative path after fighting because.
Keep talking. Jack's just getting pissed. I'm gonna let him out.
It's okay.
Hey Jack, come on, buddy. Let's go, buddy.
Let's go.
I can tell he wants to go outside. He's getting. Hey Jack, come on. See, more proof that we filmed in my garage. Come on, buddy.
Sweet boy.
Let's go, buddy. Yeah, he's a good dog, man. Come on. Just go around the wire, silly. You know what's funny is he's like an absolute he's an absolute sweetheart when it's just me.
Yeah.
The couple times my wife has sent me videos when he's home with just the wife and kids.
Yeah.
If somebody comes to the door, he turns into a psycho.
Yeah.
Like he goes from the beta male to like alpha male immediately, feels good for me.
Yeah.
So,
well, I love dogs. I'm a dog person.
Yeah, me too.
Through and through.
So just about like managing that mental spot of like not getting too dark.
Yeah, you see it all the time, like guys that retire, or like, even the whole, I don't know if you've seen some of the Nick Diaz stuff, like he had to pull out of his fight with Luke, and that's why Themba took that fight. But Nick Diaz was supposed to fight Luke just last weekend, but there was like a video of him like doing some weird stuff, like in a parking lot, like trying to light leaves on fire or something, and his girlfriend had taken a video of it, and it's like, some people like, chalk it up to like CTE, but I think that there's like something that really goes along with the emotional toll that fighting takes on people.
Yeah.
It's like anything else, right? Like we were talking about, it's like the highs of the highs and lows of the lows. Like winning a fight, especially in the UFC in front of everybody's like such an unbelievable feeling, and it's such a rare feeling that such little people get to really experience. Even guys who make it in the UFC will go. There's some guys. There's a lot of guys that will make it to the UFC and lose their way out. So they'll never get a win in the UFC, lose a few fights, and just never feel that experience.
Yeah. A good friend of mine, I don't want to throw him on the bus.
No worries.
Finally got to the UFC, had 2 fights, they cut him, and he's never been invited back. And like, that was his life's mission for 20 years.
Yeah. And there's a saying that someone had told me one time, and it's such a true saying. It's like, getting in the UFC is hard, staying in the UFC is harder. Because people think that when you get to the UFC, I've done it. No, you haven't done it. You haven't done anything, actually. You've done like what thousands and thousands of other people have done already. Hundreds of thousands of people, fight and get the opportunity. Some people get opportunities just because they were in the right place at the right time. But to stay in the UFC, to win fights, is such a hard thing to do. And it seems easy. It's like, all right, it's just me and you fighting. So one of us got to win. It's a 50-50 shot, right?
Right.
Yeah, but it's such a hard thing to do, to win a fight against another guy who doesn't want to lose a fight. Even if I come into your house, like, you're not a fighter, but you're a grappler. Like, if I came into your house and you had everything to live for, and maybe I wasn't even in that same mind space or that mindset, like, it would be a hell of a time to take you out, or vice versa.
Yeah.
Like, if someone came into my house, it'd be, a hell of a time to take me out. Even if they were better, bigger, if it was Francis Ngannou who came into my house, like, it'd still be a hell of a time to get me out. And so not only do you have to be a skilled fighter, but you have to show up on that day ready to go, and also have the mindset that you have to win above everything else. And there's so many times, even myself, I've done it so many times, But I've been in the back, even recent fights, been in the back and like questioning, why am I doing this? Like I'm warming up, I'm like, I'm going to go fight in 40 minutes. Why am I here? Like I'm getting anxious, nervous. Like why am I doing this? And over the time, I haven't gotten better at that. I've just got better at understanding that that's how I'm going to feel and be okay with it.
Yeah.
You know, like some people are like, well, how do you deal with it? Like, dude, doesn't it get easier? Like you kind of get emotionless and like,
I mean, 51 fights is a lot of fights, man.
Yeah. You think you kind of become emotionless to it, but it's more about managing the emotion versus completely disregarding the emotion. Like for me, I know that I'm super confident, comfortable. I enjoy the walkout, enjoy them putting grease on my face, enjoy, touching gloves in the first round and getting going. I enjoy all of it, but I understand that there's going to be nervousness coming out. There's going to be hesitation, anxiety. All that is going to be, that's all going to be there, but just understanding that's going to be there and being okay with that. That's what gets me through the fight or gets me to the fight. There's so many guys out there that will buckle under that pressure because it's hard. I mean, fighting is 90% mental. All the other stuff, everybody's running, everybody's boxing, everybody's grappling, everybody's doing conditioning, everybody's dieting, everybody's cutting weight. We're all doing the same stuff. The majority of it is really the mental aspect of it. I mean, it's everything. It's the perseverance, it's the heart, it's the consistency. It's a lot of things molded into one, but some people think, I got to do pads this many times a week. I got to grapple this many times a week. I got to spar this many times a week. But it really boils down to being able to show up that night with those skills that you've been training this entire time,
because you have such a breadth of knowledge of the number of fights you have. I'm going to ask you a couple questions that I hope don't offend you.
No, not at all.
You don't strike me as the type of person that's offended. But is there a time where you're like, I was walking into a fight and I was mentally prepared and I was in all the right places to win that fight and I lost? And have there been other times when you're like, oh, dude, I'm really worried about this fight and you won? Is there a correlation between like how you feel and what the outcome is?
Yeah, sometimes for sure. Yeah. I'm on one end of the spectrum in the sense that I always go into a fight knowing that I'm super confident in winning the fight and that I've done everything that I can possibly do. I've never really slouched on training. I've always been like kind of an overtraining person. So like I'm never worried about my cardio, my conditioning, the training that I put in. I'm always very confident and positive with that. But obviously, like I said, it's the mental thing. You're walking out there and your mind can kind of mess with you a little bit. But there has been plenty of times where I've gone out there, all my losses that I had, I walked out those fights completely confident I was going to win those fights. I mean, I'm not going to go into, and that's kind of like brings us back to the beginning. It's like, if I lose that confidence and the ability to have fun out there, I'm going to stop fighting. Like, I'm never going to walk out to a fight thinking I'm going to lose the fight. You see it nowadays. You see guys wanting that paycheck. I mean, if you find me in 20 years and you're like, hey, we'll pay you $7 million to, I'll pay you $20 million.
Dude, I'll walk in.
Jake Paul. Like,
$7 million, I'll walk in right now to fight.
100%.
Like, I don't care. They're like, Scott, you have to fight Andy Varela for $7 million. I'm like, fuck yeah, how bad can it be? I'll get choked out.
Yeah, exactly. So like obviously there's those circumstances, but for me specifically, my career right now, I don't think about retiring until I don't have that drive for it anymore. If I walk out to a fight, I'm like, if I lose, I lose, whatever. Like, I have that mindset in some sense, but not like that. If I have that mindset, I'm done fighting. But there are times that I go out there and I try to not say, if I lose, I lose. I just try to make losing not a big deal because I want to just be able to let it all hang out. And so, like, sometimes you got to be okay with losing.
Yeah.
Like you got there's a difference between being like, if I lose, I lose. Like almost going out there defeated. And there's a difference between that and being like, kill or be killed. Like
whatever happens.
Yeah, whatever happens. I just don't want to go out there and hesitate. So like if I get knocked out, trying to knock the guy out, that's on me. It's whatever. I'm not gonna be as disappointed as if I'm walking out. I'm like, all right, I'm probably gonna lose this fight. So I'm just going to give it to you.
It's a subtle difference, but it's worth noting that difference, right?
Yeah,
because it's
100%.
like, I have to think there's not many people that get called back to the UFC 3 times after having a loss. I've got to imagine it's because of that mentality. It's like, I am out there to entertain, and win or lose, like, it's all coming out tonight.
Yeah, 100. That's always how I've been, even from my amateur fights. Like, it's like, it's kind of that Diaz moniker, like the kill or be killed. I really gravitated towards that when I used to watch the Diaz brothers fight. And, it was just the attitude that I had. But I don't know if it's like a personality trait that I have or something that I was just born with or whatever, or maybe because of skateboarding or snowboarding or whatever it is. Like I always just wanted to push the boundary. And, you know, you see some guys that fight smart, which is fantastic. Like sometimes you just want to get your paychecks and get out of there. And I understand that to a certain degree, but for me, I've never had that. Like, I mean, I posted a picture on my Instagram after my last fight, and you know, one of the hardest things that I have that I do is to keep my hands. Oh, you can have the last one if you want.
All right, perfect.
One of the
Get drunk tonight.
one of the things that my coaches always try to reinforce is to keep my hands up. And so
yeah, because you're a really fluid fighter.
Yeah.
You do all this weird shit.
Yeah.
And
Well, I keep my hands down way too much, and you know, it's one of those things where you think your hands are up, but I think my hands are right here, but they're really right here.
Yeah.
And so after my last fight, there was a photo somebody had taken with the UFC, and my hands were at my side, literally as low as they could possibly be, and I'm just kind of mean mugging him, and I'm like right in front of him, and it's like, you know, I put the caption was my coach is saying, all right, let's work on keeping our hands up this fight. And then under me, I said, say less, you know, but it's like, because like, that's kind of how it is, you know, like, you know, we train so much, we do so much, and you try to hope that the reactions and the repetitions are what's going to show up at the fight. But every so often, sometimes you just got to just go in there and do your thing. And at certain spots in fights, for me, it's been like that. I mean, even Casey one time was talking to Eddie when I was fighting. And at the end of the fight, it was a Steven Peterson fight, and I got a bonus for that fight for fight of the night. And after the fight, or no, during the fight or after the fight, they had told me that Casey had looked over at Eddie, and Eddie looked at him and was like, bro, he's not listening to anything we're saying. He's like, you know what? Sometimes it's just about encouragement. Like, yeah. So sometimes just no more technique, just encouragement. Yes, Juice, fucking yeah, go. Cause like, it was like, if you watch that Steven Peterson fight, it's literally just me and him beating the dog shit out of each other for, 15 minutes. And that's why we got fight of the night. But it was one of those things that just technique had kind of gone out the window, and
it was a bar fight.
Yeah, basically. And I don't know how to really explain it. It's just something I really enjoy doing. Like my favorite part of fighting is being dog shit tired and knowing that guy's dog shit tired and see who has the bigger set of balls. And I mean, and not necessarily that, but just like
it comes out in your fights.
Yeah. And I've shown that, and there's other fights, that I've upped my, my intelligence of the fight and done a bit better of a job of protecting myself and being a bit smarter about it. And that shows in some fights, but every so often, in a fight, I think Casey used to say it, but he used to say sometimes a fight will break. Sometimes in an MMA match, a fight will break out, and that's like a perfect metaphor for my fighting style. It's like sometimes in an MMA fight, an actual fight will break out, and that's when kind of the rules go out the window, and you just kind of give it everything you have, and you just want to kind of test.
It's no longer a mixed martial arts event. It is a brawl.
Yeah, it's who's got the most cardio and who's willing to take more damage, and people love it, and that's been a little bit of my job security. I think I think there's only there's less than 5 guys, less than a handful of guys in the UFC that's ever been hired for a third time.
Yeah.
It's already hard to get in the UFC for the first time and to get cut, and then to get hired a second time is relatively impossible. I would say it's probably less than 10% of guys. And then to get rehired again on top of that, I got lucky with the COVID situation because they were really desperate to fill fights in, because when COVID hit, it was like I think it was like every week there was like 2 or 3 fights getting pulled from the UFC cards because of COVID for whatever reason. Luckily for me, Sean Woodson was supposed to fight Kyle Nelson from Canada, and Canada has really strict fucking COVID
Canada
bullshit was going on. And so and actually, I wasn't even – so Kyle Nelson wasn't able to fight because of the COVID stuff for Canada. And then they actually went with Daniel Pineda from Texas to fight Sean Woodson. And then he couldn't pass a COVID test. So then I was the third guy. So, like it was like –
So, wait, was this a situation where you were just, like, staying in shape, training in Vegas, and you got the call from the UFC, and you're like, hey, can you fight this weekend?
Yeah, basically, it was a Wednesday that I got the fight, and I fought on Saturday, and I actually had to make...
At what weight?
150. We did a catch weight at 150, which was still pretty tough, but...
What do you walk around at?
About 75.
175 to 145. So you're dropping 30 pounds for a fight?
Yeah, but I mean, that's over. I would say probably from 75 to 65 is just the training camp diet, and 60, I would say 63 is usually kind of what I wake up on Monday before the weigh. So like 17 pounds from Monday to Friday, but it's a whole water loading situation. I mean, the whole cutting weight process is more detailed of a sport than fighting itself. It's pretty crazy. I mean, luckily for me, I have so many fights and so much experience that it's been more of trial and error for me for the weight cut. But for me, it was COVID. I was lucky that I got cut from the UFC, and I was so mentally focused just to like, if I'm going to get cut from the UFC, if I'm not going to fight here anymore, I'm just going to be the baddest regional scene fighter ever. I'm just going to beat everybody's ass. Like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to work my ass off. And I was so motivated. It was the craziest thing because, like, I feel like some guys that are in the UFC doing well have less motivation than guys like me in that specific spot where I've lost in the UFC. I'm kind of in a spot where it's like almost like a go back home kind of spot. And I was so freaking motivated, and I don't even know where that motivation came from, but it was like I was riding my bike to Casey's almost every day, and it was like 20 something. It was like 25 miles to get to Casey's, and then 25 miles back on an old ass mountain bike that I had. It's an old Trek mountain bike that I had, and it'd be like a couple hours one way, a couple hours back the other way. Just
training 3 hours at the gym.
Yeah. We were like a couple hours, but it was when we were underground training because it was COVID. It was right at the heart of COVID, and so like I said, I have no idea where the motivation came from.
So they called you on Wednesday. You fought. Did you win?
Yeah, I choked him out with a darts choke.
Oh, fuck. So on 3 days' notice, you walk back into the UFC after being cut twice, and they're like, whatever, let's just go to this fucking guy. He's local. He's an exciting fighter. Let's pull him in for the third stint in the UFC. At this point, you're probably thinking that ship has sailed, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Well, so after I got cut the second time on a 3-loss in a row with the UFC, I had breakfast with my management, Jason, who's really good friends with Sean Shelby.
Yeah, shout out to Jason, by the way. Great guy.
Yeah, I love that guy. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And I had breakfast with him, and I was like, hey, man, so like Bellator, ONE FC, like PFL, like what's the next move? Like, I know the UFC's probably not gonna want me back. And he was like, no, Sean likes you, bro. Like, let's get you a couple.
Who's Sean?
Shelby.
Sean Shelby. I don't know who that is.
He's the matchmaker for the UFC.
Oh, so this is the guy that has 2,000 fighters in his head at all times trying to make fights.
Yeah. So there's two matchmakers, and he's the matchmaker for my weight class, and Sean Shelby's been with the UFC for a long time, but he's the boss man. Like if you're trying to please anybody, it's Sean Shelby. And so he was like, bro, Sean likes you, man. Like, if we get you a couple wins, we'll get you back in the UFC. I was like, are you like for sure? He's like, yeah, no worries. And like, we'll get you back. I'm like, all right. And then that's kind of what motivated me as well. I ended up fighting one time in Washington back at the old regional show that I used to fight at. Got a win. And then I fought February, and then March was when COVID really hit and the shutdown started happening, and like literally the next month. And I was so motivated coming off that win. That's probably what it was. I was motivated off that, what Jason had told me. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to fucking keep going. And so I was working my ass off during COVID when all the gyms were closed. We were, like I was saying, we were garage grappling. We were it was like we were just piecing together training. And and I was also riding my bike. I was running a lot. And I was just going to try to stay in as best shape as I could. And then Jason was like, after a handful of, I think it was maybe like 3 or 4 months, or maybe like 3 months, March, April, May, June. Yeah. So like 3 months, Jason was like, yo, like, you have your medical, just keep your medicals up to date. You're in Vegas. The only fights that are happening right now are at the Apex. So, and there's fights falling out every single weekend. They're going to need you. I'm telling you, they're going to need you. I'm like, are you sure? He's like, yeah, they're going to need you for like 5 weeks. He would tell me for 5 weeks. He's like, bro, just stay ready. It's going to happen. There was like 3 weekends before the weekend I fought that they were like, my name was in the hat, I guess, like is what he had told me. They just passed on me, went with somebody else. And then, like I said, I actually was getting my medicals done on Tuesday because he was like, it's a very high possibility that they're going to give you the Sean Woodson fight. And I was like, he's like, go get your medicals done right now. Make sure everything's all good. I get to the medicals, about to get my medicals done. He calls me. He's like, hey, man, they went with Daniel Pineda from Houston. I was like, all right, man, that's cool. So I start driving back, and he calls me back. He's like, hey, like, make sure you're still getting your medicals done. So I try to get my medicals done. He's like, because they might, things still might happen. Like,
Yeah,
just
shit
stay
happens.
ready. Yeah, just stay ready. And I was like, all right. The next day, he said, Daniel can't pass the COVID test. And I was like, oh, he's like, so you're in. I'm like, for real? He's like, yeah. Like, literally the Saturday before we were watching UFC, drank like a 6-pack of beers, had Taco Bell that night, the Saturday before I fought Sean Woodson. But I've been doing all the fucking work. Like, it wasn't like I was just on the couch doing that every day. It was like I would do, that's what I would do. I would train my ass off all week, and I would kind of water load those weeks. And then Saturday, when I knew I wasn't going to get the fight, obviously because the fights were that day, I'd go watch the fights, have a couple of beers, maybe eat a little bit, whatever, enjoy myself for that day. And then Sunday, I would get right back on it. And so I kept doing that. And then, so Wednesday, he's all like, I can't remember exactly how the weight thing happened, but I was all like, I'm like, it's only a few days. Is there any way they'll do like a catch weight with me? Like, can we do like 150? I could probably make that. And he's like, yeah, let's do that. They agreed to it. Friday morning, I made 150 pounds. I actually made it almost, I was a couple pounds away from making actual featherweight. So I could have probably made featherweight if I really tried.
So wait, from Wednesday afternoon to Friday morning, how much weight did you drop?
It was about 18 pounds. It wasn't too bad, honestly. I mean,
18 pounds in 48 hours?
Yeah.
I got to lose 9 pounds by January 4th for a jiu-jitsu tournament. I'm like, fuck this. So we'll get some tips off air about how I can drop 9 pounds in a week.
Well, like I said, I was kind of water loading every week because I knew the possibility.
What does that mean for people that are listening that aren't like fight fans? What the fuck is water loading?
So water loading is, well, some people call it water loading. Some people call it water tapering. I think there's 2 different ways that people do it. Some people will like add more water throughout the week. I'll cut more water out. So Sundays, I do it a bit extreme. I'm a big guy, but I would do everything too extreme. I mean, I fight for a living.
Shocking.
So on Sunday before the fight, so basically 5 days before I make weight, Sunday, I drink 3 gallons of water. It's a lot of water I'm drinking, but I'm not like just hammering it down at one time. I'm drinking it all the way throughout the day. And it sucks. Like I'm pissing.
3 gallons of water?
Most people do it with like 2 gallons, sometimes 2.5. I just did it to 3 gallons because Chris Curtis one time told me he did it 3 gallons. I was like, I want to give it a shot.
Yeah,
so
but
like,
Chris Curtis is a psycho.
Yeah, and he's also a big guy too. He's a bit bigger than I am, but I was like, you know what?
Bit. He walks around at like 210, 220, bro.
So I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to give it a shot. And so I tried it and it's kind of stuck with me. So I do 3 gallons and then I slowly taper it off. I'll go 3 gallons, 2.5, 2, 1.5, 1.
And no food?
No, I eat food, but basically low to no carbohydrates, and I'll cut all the sodium out about Wednesday, and from Sunday up until Wednesday, I'm not having a shit ton of sodium either. Like I'm still pretty low on that as well, but I completely cut that out on Wednesday and then and what it basically does is like you drink so much water that you're just pissing your pants every fucking 2 seconds. So you're just pissing, and it gets your body accustomed to just kicking weight out, kicking the water weight. And then once you stop having carbohydrates, which retains water, stop having the sodium, which also retains water, then your body just literally just melting all the water off your body. And slowly but surely you'll get down. And then I usually wake up I wake up early and cut weight. Most people do it Thursday night. I do it Friday morning. I wake up at 4 because I don't like cutting weight and trying to sleep. I won't sleep anyway, so I'll try to sleep a little bit, and then I'll just get up early and cut it. And then you're dehydrated for a less of time. So I'll wake up about 1:54 on Friday morning and cut 8 pounds within like 2 hours, and then I make weight at 146. And then that's kind of how. And then
you just say it so nonchalant, like I just lose 8 pounds in 2 hours, like sauna, salt bath, shit like that.
Usually majority of it is usually I have a portable sauna. Most people have them, and that cut weight. They're fighters, and I use that. And then I'll wrap myself up in tinfoil blankets like everybody else does, and just I mean, cutting weight definitely sucks, and it definitely sucks for bigger guys like me because it's a whole different type of hell.
Dude, I'm just like, this is making me like sick to my stomach that you guys do this for my viewing pleasure for $89 for a pay-per-view.
It's one of those things like we were talking about earlier about the sense of humor that people have, like all your sensitivities and everything goes out the door when you're laying on a bathroom floor and you have a pound to cut and you're just dead and you're like, you have to do it. Like it's such a funny thing because like I wouldn't want to just get naked in front of people, right? But if my coaches are there and I got people there and I'm cutting weight, I don't give a fuck about being
naked. You're in too much pain to care if somebody sees your ding-a-ling, right?
I will walk around the entire hotel buck naked. It don't make no difference to me. I don't care. You really start to understand what it's like for people that are, stranded out on a boat or something and they have no water and they're like dehydrated. Like you can understand how they start to hallucinate and they start to really get desperate. Like I would say, like, honestly, like if it didn't put any weight on me, if I pissed and put it in the freezer and it was like ice cold piss and you told me, or if God told me that it wouldn't put any extra weight on me but I could drink it, I would probably drink it.
Oh, for sure.
Like, it's crazy. Like, when you're dehydrated, it's such a different type of pain and such a different type of...
What hurts, by the way? Is it your brain? Is it your stomach? Is it your chest? Everything?
Have you ever just been so fucking thirsty?
No. I've never been disciplined enough to make myself not within like arm's length of a drink. It's length of a drink.
It's not necessarily, it's not a pain. It's not like a specific pain I can pinpoint, like where, oh, my fucking chest is hurting. Where, although that sometimes when people are cutting weight, your organs start to seem to fail a little bit, in some sense. Of the word.
I love that you said that with a laugh. Your organs just fail a little bit. It's fine.
You probably laid down for a while, got up and got lightheaded before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So when you cut weight, it's like that magnetized by like 100. Like, every time you stand up, you're gonna get lightheaded. You feel that your body's sucked up. Like, you're not there completely mentally. You're just trying to focus on getting to the next thing that you have to do. And that's why I do my weight cuts Friday morning, because I want to stay in that state of mind for the smallest amount of time. I don't want to there's so many guys who cut like a massive amounts of weight on Thursday night and then they go to bed, try to go to bed dehydrated. They're not going to sleep. They're going to have to get up and try to cut more weight. Fuck that. Like, I'd rather get
just do it all at once.
Well, I'd rather get up at 4 a.m., start cutting my weight at about 5, make weight by 7, go hop on the scale by 9, and then be hydrating already. Like, it's only a few hours that I'm going to be really sucked up. And
so have I read this correctly that for safety reasons, they now let you do the official weigh-in in the morning, but then you do like the big promotional pay-per-view weigh-in later during the day?
Well, I think the UFC had kind of changed the way they did things they try to prioritize the fighters. And so, like, a lot of regional shows, they're only wanting to pay the commission for 24 hours or whatever it is. And so, like a lot of these regional shows will do weigh-ins at like 7 on Friday. So it's like, it sucks because, like, guys will be cutting weight all day and they're just like dehydrated all day. For us, the morning weigh-ins are the best, but it's because the UFC has, a lot of money. Right. So they don't give a shit. And so, and that's always the nicest thing because, like,
so they let you weigh in the morning, then you don't fight till 7 o'clock the next night. Yeah. So you got like 32, 38 hours to rehydrate.
Yeah. It really adds, to being able to rehydrate. And I think that's the smartest thing, honestly. Like, because then you got guys that are in there that are basically 100% from the weight cut. Like, so, because I remember I used to cut weight. There's been a couple of times on a regional show where I had missed weight originally, but they give you a couple hours to go cut the weight. And there was one time I was fighting for a belt, and I had to go cut the extra pound. And this was before I knew how to cut weight at all. And ended up finally making weight about 9 p.m. and fought the next night about the same time. And but it really just took away because, like, the UFC, I'll make weight at 9 a.m. So that's like 12 hours difference. So, like, by the time I make weight from the UFC at 9 a.m., about 12 o'clock or like about noon, I'm like almost back to normal. I feel fucking great.
What does that first bottle of Gatorade taste like after you've lost 18 pounds of water weight?
It's so fantastic. It's one of those things that you dream about the entire camp, and that you're dreaming about when you're sitting in the sauna and your eyes are sucked up. I cut like a lot of weight, and so, like, my eyes will sink in so much that my eyesight is kind of off. Like, it's weird. It's a weird feeling, and my ears will start clicking, which is probably not the best thing to tell people, but it's just one of those things, like. So,
like, if you dehydrate all this, it's almost all water weight. Is it legal to do like IVs to rehydrate, or does it have to all be?
Yeah, they used to do IVs, but they outlawed those because I never did IVs myself, but I think they were saying something about they were maybe trying to help guys or prevent guys from cutting too much weight.
Yeah.
It don't make a fucking difference, man.
Yeah.
Like, guys are still cutting weight. But yeah, it's so good. But what you have to do is the hardest thing to do after your weight cut is to pace yourself, because all you want to do is chug down a freaking gallon of whatever, and you got to understand that you can't take it that quickly. You have to really.
That's what she said.
Yeah, yeah. And he said that sometimes, you know. But you definitely have to pace yourself, man. Like the UFC PI, I'm grateful for them because and that's one of the things I'm grateful for fighting for the UFC is that they have a whole team behind the nutrition side of things. So like I make weight, when I show up to weigh-ins, they have all the rehydration stuff for me, and they're like, all right, you drink this for the first 15 minutes, this for the next 15 minutes, and then you have this bigger one you can do for the half hour after that. And he's like, try to pace yourself through these things, even though most of us don't do that. I'll drink it till I'm about to yak, and then I'll relax. 5 minutes later, I started chugging again until.
So if you're weighing in at 145, what are you walking into the ring at?
Me personally, I'm at least 65, so I'm at least 20 pounds heavier.
20 pounds of water.
Sure, 100%.
20 pounds of water in a day and a half.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there was a guy, Gleason Tebow, who they were like, Joe Rogan was like making all this fuss about a long time ago because it's when they started weighing guys the day of the fight too, just to see where they were at. They wanted to just calculate how much weight people were cutting. And Gleason Tebow made 156 pounds on the scale. The next day he was like 186.
30 pounds of water weight.
Maybe he was 188 or something. Like he was like 30 plus pounds heavier than he was at weigh-ins. And Joe Rogan was like, man, this Gleason Tebow got to figure out how to like write a book about cutting weight because that's fucking insane. And Gleason Tebow has always been a big, strong guy. He's the guy. If you're a huge MMA fan, obviously Khabib is undefeated. But if you watch that fight, specifically that fight, Joe Rogan even is commentating it. And the last like round, Joe Rogan is talking about how, oh, this is a good fight. This is a good learning experience for Khabib because he's an up-and-coming kid. He's going to lose this fight most likely because even like from the vantage point of even Joe Rogan, cage side, he thought he was losing that fight. And if you look at the stats, and if you watch the fight, you would probably agree that Gleason Tebow probably won that fight. I mean, it was a close fight, but you'd probably lean it over to Gleason Tebow. But yeah, he was the guy that is the only questionable win that Khabib has on his record, and because he's undefeated. So, but I mean that was back in the day, and it was a close fight to be all fair about it. But that was a fight that even Joe Rogan thought he lost before the scorecards called it.
You mentioned the PI, which is the Performance Institute here in Vegas. Yeah. That is basically a full-time training center. Any UFC fighter under contract can go there and get world-class wrestling, striking, weight training, nutrition, free food, whatnot. Walk us through the last 15 years. Obviously, you've had a lot of coaches.
Yeah.
Who are some of the most impactful coaches that you have had?
I mean, honestly, everybody brings something unique, to the experience. My very first coach, Rich Guerin, who's passed away, he got me into the sport, and he was one of the guys that really motivated me to be who I was at the time, and to really chase the dream down. And then after Rich Guerin, my next coach was Robert Follis, for only a short period of time because he had killed himself, and which was pretty devastating. But he was really only my coach for like 5 months, and then went to Casey Holstead, and Casey brought his own his own type of personality to it, and I really enjoyed how Casey was. He was one of those hard-nosed guys that kind of like was the anti-victim, like don't feel fucking bad for yourself, fucking pick yourself up by your bootstraps and get the fucking job done, kind of. That's kind of how his personality has always been, even with grappling, and just very kind of edgy, kind of an edgy guy. And I really enjoyed training under Casey. And then Eddie at the same time. Eddie was one of my coaches with Casey, and Eddie's been around with me for my last like 13, 14 fights, and all but one was in the UFC. So he's been around for a long time with me, and I like Eddie's a bit more laid back, kind of brings that. It used to bring that balance with Casey. Him and Casey got along really well, and so it was always nice to have those guys on the road. But I would say, and then now Eric Nixick is my main coach, and Eddie as well.
Where's Eric coach out of? Are you at Extreme?
Yeah, Extreme Couture. I transitioned from Coach Casey Holstead to Eric Nixick. And luckily for me,
Casey screwed up and decided he wanted to invest in his kids.
No, you know,
Just
it was,
messing around.
no, for 100%. Like, and that's how it should be. You know, you know, it was one of those things that, you know, it was a tough decision to make on both of our ends. But me and Casey are still on good terms. Obviously, we don't have the same type of relationship that we had beforehand. But he's still a good friend of mine, and I like him you know, I love him like a dad. So you know, I think it is more important for you to invest in your own family. I feel like one of the biggest and hardest things to deal with as a coach is to keep that balance between the fighters that you coach and your family, because it's really easy to blur those lines. You know, when you're coaching people, like even me, like I've helped, you know, coach people and helped them out and stuff. I can understand and see how that can get blurred, because these guys are like your family. Like all the guys I train with, like all the coaches that I've ever had, they're like, I don't look at them as just my buddies. Like these guys are like I'm closer to the majority of the guys I train with than my own blood brother, you know, like, you know, like, and so, it's easy to really like, you know, mistake those types of things. And so I really commend Casey for really putting the time and effort into his kids, you know, and his daughter's doing fantastic with golf. And I think, it's the most important years. I mean, when your kids are as young as they are, you know, like there's only that much time to have with those kids. And so, you know, I think it was getting to a point where he was specifically falling out of fighting a little bit, and falling more into being with his kids. And I think that was a fantastic decision by himself. And, for me, you know, I was still in the prime of fighting, that I wanted a coach that was completely invested in fighting 100%. And Casey just wasn't doing that anymore. And so transitioning over to Eric Nixick, he's a guy. What happened with Casey too was that it kind of got whittled down to just basically me as the UFC guy he was coaching. So when you only have one guy in the UFC that you're coaching, if I'm in fight camp, then he's in fight camp. But if I'm not, then he's kind of like willy-nilly doing this and doing that. And but with Eric, the thing I love about Eric is that Eric's got a huge stable of fighters that, like, if I'm not in fight camp, 27 other fighters are in fight camp. So his mindset is always fighting. And every time I show up to do pads with him, I did pads with him this morning, and it's like, it's not just like a freestyle. It's like I can tell he's put time and effort into understanding my fighting abilities and putting that into our pad sessions, where it's like, it's not just like, oh, let's just kind of freestyle it. Let's just, you know, whatever, let's just do this or let's just do that. He really invests the time and effort into understanding how I fight and how I can fight better. And so like, that's one thing I really respect about him. And he does that with all of his fighters. You know, it's like I'm obviously different than other guys. And so he's going to understand what my skill sets are and how we can advance those. And if I have holes in my games, how we can, you know, protect those holes. And so, you know, and that's one of those things that I really do enjoy about Eric. Obviously people get spread thin. Eric gets spread thin. Sometimes he's gone. I mean, with Ngannou, when Ngannou had his fight for the PFL just recently, he was gone for a couple of weeks over in Saudi Arabia or wherever he was on the other side of the globe. And so you got to understand that he's not going to be there all the time. But I do understand. But what I can trade that off for is that I know even when he's out doing those things, he's still taking notes. He's still thinking about me as a fighter and what we're going to work on when he gets back. And so that's one of those things that I really did enjoy. With Casey, there was a point when I first met Casey, we had like, you know, a huge stable of fighters, and he had like, you know, more than a handful of UFC guys. So it was like his mindset was in the game of UFC fighting and MMA fighting. And then what happened was one guy would leave or, you know, would retire. Then someone had moved, and then this guy, you know, kind of fired Casey. And then it was like, then it got to the point where it was just me. Like it was just me and a couple guys and then a handful of amateurs. And it was like, it just felt like the lack of the guys fighting was getting lower. And then maybe it was also causing Casey to have less interest in it.
Yeah. And like you said, people go through different seasons of life, right? 100%.
I mean, there's going to be a time when fighting is going to be a lot smaller a portion of my life, you know. Having my own son and it obviously brings me different types of priorities as well, but motivations as well. But fighting is still very important to me right now, but 5 years from now, maybe not. Who knows?
Yeah.
You know?
I was just going to say, like, speaking of this, right? Like, you're coming into a different season of life as a new father.
Yeah.
How has that changed you as a man, as a fighter, as a husband? Like, how old's your son? 9 months?
Almost 9 months this Sunday.
9 months. So, like, what is that like for you, right? Because, like, it's really easy when it's just you fighting in the amateurs, like, whatever, I'm just this scrappy kid, I can still sell some weed. Then you get a wife, and you got to take a little bit more responsibility. And then, like, even when I had a wife, I was like, whatever, like, if this doesn't work out, it doesn't work. But once you have kids, that shit gets deathly serious.
Oh, 100%.
So, like, how has that changed you as a man or as a fighter, or your priorities, your motivation?
I mean, you understand it. Obviously, you have kids yourself, so, like, you understand it. And I don't know how far from the original time of you having a kid it's been, because I obviously, if you have kids, you understand it, but then at a certain point you forget how it was before having kids. Like, you know, even me now, like my wife told me the other day, is like, oh, I kind of forget what it was like before we had AJ.
Oh yeah,
like, so
no,
like,
there's life pre-kids and then there's life after kids,
yeah,
and it's totally fucking different.
And you forget that you even forget what that life was like before.
Yeah. Like, if I wanted to, when I was single, this weekend I'll just go to Cabo. Yeah. And who cares?
Yeah.
I don't get drunk. And I have no responsibilities. I don't call in sick for work on Monday.
100%.
And now it's like, Alina's got a soccer game and Gabriel's got jiu-jitsu practice. And, like, it's just a different game, man.
Yes, and for me, so I had originally told my management that I wanted to fight before he was born. Because I was like, I was actually off for like 8 months. And I was coming off of 2 losses, and I was off for like 8 months. Me and my management had talked about it. And it was in the transition of me going from Casey Halstead to Eric Nixick. And so, like, I wanted to take a little bit of time off. My management said, just take some time off, just regroup, you know, get with Eric and just see how that goes. And then, you know, we'll get you a fight scheduled down the line. I'm like, all right, sounds good. And so my wife, we had gotten pregnant, and we knew she was going to, we knew the date, we knew the due date. And so I was like, yo, Jason, due date's March 14th. Can we just fight before that? And this has like been 4 months, 3-4 months before the fight. And he's all like, oh, yeah, we'll get you something scheduled for sure before the fight. I was like, all right, sounds good. And I mean, I'm kind of on him. But with the UFC, it's just tough because, like, they book you when they book you, and you just kind of got to go with the flow, and you got to kind of adjust your lifestyle around how they book you.
Yeah, because what do they have in the stable? Like 500-600 fighters, something like that?
I mean, I don't know what it is now, but I know there was like a little bit over 600 a little while ago. That's what they were insured for.
So you figure maybe there's like 2 fights a month, sometimes 3.
No, it's like every weekend.
Oh, it's every weekend now?
Literally, yeah. I mean, I think the UFC does like 48 or 50 shows a year.
All right. And like 10 fights each. So you've got 2 competitors. So there's like 800 fighters a year. Yeah. But if there's 600 in the stable, like, you might only be due, quote unquote, 1 fight a year.
Yeah, 1.5, 2 fights maybe if you're lucky. And like, I mean, for 2024, I only was able to fight twice. I wanted to fight a third time because I fought in July, and it was almost 6 months. I had to get another fight within this year, but it's just been tough, like, to get on there. But so, anyways, long story short, I supposed to due date was March 14th, so I was like, anytime before that would be great. He calls me like a few months before the due date, or like about like 2 months before, and he's like, hey, March 23rd against Ramos at the Apex, you down for that? And I was like, I fucking love the matchup. I'm not going to say no, I want to fight. Like, let's go. I was coming off 2 losses, and I feel like the most motivation that most guys have is off losses. And for me, I was so freaking motivated to go in there and just take someone's head off. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. 8 days. So the due date was the 14th. He ended up.
So you're in the heat of your fucking weight cut when your kid's being born,
bro. Well, kind of a little bit.
Just laying on the ground in some like astronaut blankets, trying to kiss your newborn.
So basically, I was in the obviously the heat of my fight camp. It was the fight week's a bit easier in the sense of like of training. Training's a bit like dumbed down a little bit, lack of a better word, but you're not cutting weight too hard yet at that point. It was 8 days, so he ended up being born on the 15th. But not only that, my allergies were insane. Probably the worst my allergies have ever been in the entire time that I've been in Vegas. And if it was the weekend before, I might have had to pull because my allergies were so bad. I thought I was sick. Like, I thought I had something. Like, and I was so worried because I was in the hospital with my wife giving birth, and I was talking to the ladies. I'm like, I'm kind of worried to be here because like my nose was completely congested. I was like coughing, my sore throat. Like I got all the symptoms of allergies, but it was so strong that I thought I was sick with something else. And
so you're sick, you got a newborn,
yes.
You're staring down the barrel of a massive weight cut, and you got to fight somebody who, if you lose, you're probably out of the UFC for the third and last time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's really
so no stress.
Yeah, no stress at all. But really,
dude, you're a different breed, man. You are a different breed of human being.
Well, when you get punched in the face for a living, I think things get a little bit I can't figure the word, but just like dumbed down in a sense. Like things don't become as important, like. But not only that. Having my son was one of those things that was so unbelievable to me. Like to watch my wife give birth, it was like insane to me. And so it was like fighting it became like fighting was such a, like obviously fighting was such an important thing in my life for so long and carried a lot of stress, anxieties and hard work with it. But as soon as I watched her give birth, like after that, I was like, this is nothing. Like I'll walk out there completely clear-minded and just ready to go. And I remember being in the back and I was like, man, I feel so fucking good. Like usually I'm fucking nervous. Usually I'm I want to go piss like 10 times. Because I'm like, oh, I gotta piss. But I was in the back and I was about as cool, calm, and collected as I've ever been. And I was like, man, and then I went out there and ended up choking him out in the first round. He did drop me in the first round, and it was a bit of a crazy 2 minutes, but I ended up choking him out. And
he got a little overzealous, and you jumped on his neck, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he had the fight before that, he got choked out with the guillotine by Charles Jourdain, and so I knew he was gonna be susceptible to that. And I'm always pretty good with the guillotine. So, but after the fight, I was like, man, I should just have a kid before every fight because it literally just took all the fucking stress out of my, it really just took about, I wouldn't say all the stress, but I would say it took about 50-60% of the usual stress, anxiety. And I'm already a pretty chill person. So like, not only am I already a chill person, but on top of that, it took away a majority of my stress and my anxiety reaching into that fight and going into the weight cut. Like the weight cut, seemed easier. Everything just seemed easier. Everything just kind of just fell off my shoulders. Like everything was like, there was just something more to maybe fight for. I don't know. And even in the fight after that, when I fought C-Rod over in Colorado, same thing. It just felt, everything's just felt.
You won that one as well, right?
Yeah. I choked him out with the guillotine. And it's funny because I have 41 professional fights and I only have 2 guillotines, and the only 2 guillotines I have is my last 2 fights.
Dude, Andy's gonna be wanting a commission, bro.
No, it's funny because
we're gonna have to make a clip here of Andy Varela teaches UFC fighter how to guillotine or something.
It's funny because I had on my post fight interview 2 fights ago against Ramos, I had mentioned Andy Varela, and he had reposted it, and he's like, "Oh, thank you, bro." But Andy knows I love him, and that he's he's one of those guys that's just. 1 out of a million, it's just like he has the ability he just understands grappling on a whole different level. Some people can be like, oh man, I'm like when I first moved to Vegas, I trained with some guys and then I ran into Andy and I was like, wow, this guy is just at a different level. You don't understand that level until you run into a guy at that level. And who knows, it's so crazy because I see guys that have beaten Andy on grappling tournaments and I'm like, bro, that's fucking crazy. Andy's insane. Right. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm actually a really good grappler in the sense of it. I would say I'm above average in the UFC at grappling. And Andy treats me like a little kid sometimes, and I'm just like, this is crazy because no one really does that to me. And then when you run across a guy that can do that to you, and then you hear about that guy that can do that to you, that other guys are beating him. And I know Andy, it's not like they're doing that to Andy, but guys that have beaten Andy, I'm just like, bro, there's levels above Andy. That's crazy. That's even more crazy to me, Right. And so it's just funny because I had mentioned him after that in the post-fight interview 2 fights ago, and he knows what's up. He knows his guillotine's the fucking shit. And
his guillotine's the best in the business.
Everybody knows about it, and and so
it's so funny. Everybody that he meets in a grappling match hides. They hide their neck. Yeah. Whether he's won or lost or whatever, he always goes out on his shield. Yeah. But it's they fucking hide their neck because they know if he gets a hold of the top of their head, they're fucked. It's over. Yes. It's funny because my kids, 6-year-old Alina, 8-year-old Gabriel, take the kids class, and they're super blessed to have Andy as their instructor. And one of the reasons why I do this podcast, it makes no money yet. I do it mostly for fun to talk to cool guys like you. But part of me is like, my family doesn't have a great health history.
Yeah.
So at least if I die young, my kids will have a couple thousand hours of content to go back and watch of like, oh, this is how dad thought. This is how much dad cussed.
Yeah.
One day my kids are going to be somewhere 12, 15, 25, and they're going to be like, holy shit, man. We got to like train under Andy Varela as a 6-year-old. Like they don't understand. To them, he's just like the coach who yells at him and makes him do push-ups. But they don't understand. This is like being able to train under like Lamar Odom, like a world-class competitor in the NBA.
It's
and
crazy.
you're just taking like free throw shots with them. And my kids don't appreciate that yet. And I hope one day they come to appreciate it.
Oh, it's absolutely insane, man. I even, I mean, so the hometown that I'm from is a small town. I think maybe like 150,000 people or something, but it's not super small, but it's not big by any means. But the MMA scene is very small there, and after I had left there, everything kind of slightly fell apart with the MMA scene over there. But I go there, I go back home and visit all the time, and I'll go in there and train with these guys, and it's so incredibly insane the difference between those guys and the guys at Andy's class or like any of the gyms here in Vegas. It's crazy. And I'll talk, it's, I see it firsthand and I'm like, it's crazy. Cause like, it brings me back to the days where I realized it was just a slight level above street fighting. And it's kind of where it's at still over there because it's a small town, and it hasn't, Vegas is like the mecca of fighting, mecca of grappling, mecca of basically a lot of things, So when you go back to a small town where it's not as, important for people to want to go grapple. Like people don't really know what grappling is. That's not their pastime over there. Here, it's so prevalent and it's so mainstream that it is like people want to get their kids into grappling. And so, but back home, it's still pretty insane how big of a difference it is in some of these smaller towns that you would go to in the United States versus like going to an Andy's class for kids class at 5. There's a lot of adults that would back at home, that couldn't hang with the kids here in town. It's insane. These kids at 6, 7, 8 years old understand the logistics of jujitsu above black belts that I used to train with when I first started training, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's funny. When we moved to Vegas, I always had a second house up here, but then during COVID, we started coming here more often because LA was a shit show and it was all locked down. And I was like, I had done like a year of gi jiu-jitsu down in LA. And then, see, proof that I'm an old man. There's my alarm telling me I got to take my nightly drugs. So I had done like a year of gi. I had boxed for like 10 years. I wrestled in high school. I'm not particularly athletic, but I'm a tough guy.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's this gym called 10th Planet. I didn't know anything about it. Yeah. There's this gym called 10th Planet, like literally a mile from our house. I'll go check that out. And I went to a night class and I get my fucking ass beat. So, I didn't start till jitsu till I was 40. And there was like, Adam and Nick and Spencer and these 22-year-old killers. And I walked in there.
How old are you now?
I'm 46. I'm going to be 46 soon.
Okay.
So I just got my fucking ass beat, like absolutely fucking destroyed.
Yeah.
And I called Andy. All right. I think I hit him up on Instagram and I'm like, hey, you don't know me. You're the coach there. I just started. Like, how much are private lessons? And he's like, I don't know you. So they're like, whatever they were, $100, $150 or something. And I'm like, I'm going to give you $2,000 tomorrow. I cannot get my ass beat by a fucking teenager. And so I gave him I think I gave him like $2,000. I took like 20 private lessons with him and Nick to where I could at least fucking defend myself. Cause I'm like, what I was doing in LA is not what you guys do here in Vegas, going from gi to no gi, from a bunch of 40-year-old like dads doing this for fun to like a bunch of competitors. I was like, Jesus Christ. And then I walk in there to the morning class one time and I roll with this guy who I could tell was an athlete. And no joke, I think he submitted me 11 times in 5 minutes. And I walk over to the coach and I was like, hey, Casey, can you please just tell me that guy's like pretty good, because he just threw me around the way I throw my 5-year-old around. He's like, you don't know who that is? He's like, that's Tom Lawler. He was in the UFC for like 10 years. I'm like, okay, I feel better about myself. Like if somebody's going to beat my ass like that bad and treat me like a child, I want it to be Julian. I want it to be Tom, somebody who was at least in the UFC. So at least now I'm competent enough to defend myself. But Jesus Christ, dude, that gym is like a different level.
Well, and like, bringing it back to that point, it's like, it's definitely humbling, because nowadays you walk into a gym and you run into a kid like Adam or like Spencer, especially back when they were just a blue belt.
Yeah.
And those kids were so fucking good at blue belt that if you're a guy who's like, oh, I've been doing this for a couple of years back in LA or whatever, and you come out here and these kids, these teenager kids that look like, Adam at the time, and when I first met Adam, he looked like he was 12 years old.
Yeah, he looked like a child.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got like a fake mustache now. He looks kind of tough, but
yeah.
I'm like, Adam, that mustache ain't fooling nobody, bro.
Yeah, me and Adam are really close, and so we talked probably basically on a daily basis. But it's funny because I said something to him the other day about his mustache. But it's like you walk into a gym and you see a kid like Adam who looks like he looks like a young teenager, and he's like rolling you up, and you're like, what? I'm a grown ass man. This guy, it's definitely a bit humbling, and it can be kind of a mind fuck when you go to these gyms and that happens to you. Especially like for you, like you started doing jiu-jitsu at 40 years old, like you're like, oh, I'm a fucking grown ass man. I'll be able to pick this up and start whooping people's asses. And
no,
you're
not
like,
true.
God damn, man, this kid looks like he's 12 years old and he's like, fuck, get the better of me. This is horrible.
I'm like, dude, has your balls dropped yet? Like, I should have some man strength on you or something.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good stuff. Yeah. So what do you think the future looks like for you? Like, obviously you got a lot more fights in you. You're still passionate. Yeah. Like, it seems like you have this renewed vigor since having a kid. But like, what does the future look like for a UFC fighter? Or, if you don't mind me asking, obviously the contracts have gotten better and bigger as you've gotten more mature. But like for a non-championship caliber fighter right now, which is kind of where the big boy money is.
Yeah.
Like, is there sponsorship opportunities for you? Do you do seminars? Can you train? Can you teach? Or is it like, I'm solely focused on being a fighter and I'll figure that out whenever I have to figure that out?
Yeah, I specifically, like, one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to end up switching over from Casey to Eric was because he was kind of falling out, and also like I was kind of running MMA practices for a lot of the guys pretty regularly, and I got to the point where I was just like, I don't want to do this. Like, all I want to do is focus on fighting, and so and that's kind of like a little bit of what happened with the whole situation with me and Casey. But for me, as long as I can focus on fighting, and as long as the UFC will keep me, keep paying me what they pay me and keep me on the roster, I will fight. Everybody wants to be a Jim Miller. Jim Miller's like 40-something years old, still winning fights. I think he's like at fight 45 for the UFC. I think he's either has the most UFC fights or like pretty close to it. Like, but I think he's got a lot of accolades, like some of the most bonuses in the UFC. And he's like 43 or 44. He did UFC 100. He was at UFC 200. He fought UFC 300.
Whoa.
Yeah. So he's a guy that's been around the block, and that's like, ultimately that's kind of the dream, really. Like, everybody that's a fighter wants to do it until they, till they can't do it anymore. Obviously, I don't want to get taken away from fighting because of damage or because for whatever reason, and I don't want to lose a bunch of fights, and that's the reason why I'm out. But if I'm still getting paid what I'm getting paid at the UFC, and if I'm fighting for a big organization like that, I'll just keep going until they decide to cut me. And at that point, unless another company is willing to take me and pay me relatively similar to that, then I don't think it'll be worth it for me anymore. Obviously fighting is something I love to do, but you also have to understand when it's time to take a step away. Like we were talking about, like, there's these kids, man. These kids are getting better and better every year. And, I don't want to be a 40-something-year-old guy trying to fight a kid that's, Raul Rosas and losing fights to kids like that and, kind of tarnishing my own legacy. You see it happen. Like Cerrone did that for a while. Cerrone, I think, was on like 7 losses. Tony Ferguson, he's the biggest evidence for that is that a guy who just keeps losing, and it's almost like the fans are like, bro, like, please leave. Like, well, he's already tarnished it so much. It's like now it's like kind of like who cares? But at a point where you're like 3-4 losses in a row, it's like you're getting to the age where you're like 38, 39, 40 years old. Like, it should be a time where you should just be able to step away. But I get it at the same time, like being a fighter, like nobody wants to get out on a loss. Like, you want to win a fight, and you're most motivated when you lose fights. So you want to get it back. And I think some of these guys, like Dana White doesn't want to, some guys don't have that opportunity, but like guys like Cerrone, guys like Tony Ferguson, guys like BJ Penn, I mean, Leonard Garcia, even back in the day, their last like 6, 7, 8 fights in the UFC were losses, but because they're legends. They're such legends that the Dana White was willing to let them do it. But there should have been a point in between there somewhere that the people around them, their wives, their friends, their family should have been like, hey man, like, I know you love doing this shit. Let's do something else, man. Like, go race dirt bikes, go do something else. Like, fighting is obviously not in your cards anymore. There's, you can be the best fighter in the world, but age catches up, man. That's one of those things.
Age is undefeated, man.
No, 100%. Casey also used to have a saying where he would say experience and it was experience and athleticism were like strangers that would cross each other in the night. It's like you have, there's only such a small amount of time where you have enough experience and enough athleticism to really make it in sports in general, and before you know it, you're too old to compete with the young guys anymore. And there's a point where you're too young that you don't have enough experience to compete with the older guys. So like, there's only a small gap where you can really, really take advantage of that. And, a guy like Jim Miller is one of those guys who's been able to extend that a bit further out. And, if I won 10 fights in a row from now and I was fucking 42 years old fighting for the UFC still, I would be super happy about it. But I got to be realistic in some sense. And, I don't think about necessarily coaching. I mean, I'll be involved in fighting somehow for sure, whether it's coaching, whether it's just, even if it's just my son training and I'm just helping him out. But I'm not, I don't think that, I'm not delusional to think that I'm going to fight for the UFC till I'm 50 years old and be able to retire,
right.
in a mansion. So like, there's, other things in store and in play as well. So, I'll figure those things out when I'm done fighting, but for right now, just focus on fighting.
I love it, man. I have to ask, cause I work in the mortgage space.
Yes.
Did you ever buy a house?
Yeah. We got a house here.
What's that like to buy a house as like this self-employed fighter? Like, what was that like filling out an application? Okay. Job experience, punching people in the face.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic, man. It's really one of those things that like, one of the best feelings in the world is to win. I mean, like for me specifically, or as a fighter, is to win a fight in the UFC and just feel it all come to fruition. Like everything that you like, and usually that moment is very fleeting. It's only like a few minutes where you're really like, holy shit, like I won this fight. Like
Joe Rogan's interviewing you.
Like, oh
you're
God,
like,
this is absolutely amazing, But one of those aspects is those types of things where you buy a house, you do things for your family that people with normal jobs do, but you're doing it with something that you love to do. So, it has a different perspective. Like I don't feel like I'm working. I just feel like I'm kind of striking lightning in a bottle every so often, and it's just working out in its way that I'm able to provide for my family. And so like every time I do that, it's like a very exciting thing. It's not the mundane 9 to 5. I got to go to, clock in, clock out. Although I am willing to do that, but it's one of those things where you just, it gives you more appreciation for it. Like just being able to take my wife, and letting her at least have our schedule where we me and my wife, the hours that we're out of the house is like, we never have to have daycare. We don't have any babysitters really. Like we've been able to be with our son for this, he's almost a year old, and we've been able to be, if it's not me, it's her. It's not her, it's me. We're always around our kid now. And so like, and this is, I feel like it's the most important time. And so like, that's like priceless to me. Like having like all the money in the world or whatever is good and whatever. But, being able to spend the time that I have that's so valuable with my son right now is priceless. And being able to have my wife do the same, like if we were both working as, whatever it was, if I was an accountant working a 9 to 5, my wife was a teacher or something working 9 to 5, and our kid had to go to daycare every, some people after, 3 months of having their kid's already being at, at a daycare or a babysit or whatever the situation is. It's like, that's crazy to me. Like I feel like this is the most important time to really bond with your kids and enjoy that time. And it, like, I'm just so blessed that what I've been able to do has been able to provide that for us.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah.
I always like to finish on a couple questions.
Yeah,
one, favorite movie and why. I feel I'm a movie junkie, so I feel like I can learn a lot. And then we're filming this at the very tail end, December of 2024, so this will probably come out 2025. What are you most looking forward to in 2025? And then I'd love to hear from you, like, are you a fight fan? Like, do you watch fights? Are you into boxing? Do you watch hockey on your downtime? So favorite movie and why. What are you most looking forward to in 2025? And then, like, what do you do for relaxation? Like, are you a sports junkie, or are you like, I do this all day long. The last thing I want to think about is fights.
So the first part of that question, my favorite movie, for a long period of time, my favorite movie was Meteor Man. I don't know if you ever,
What?
Do you ever watch Meteor Man?
Yeah, I've seen it, of course.
I was just very infatuated when I was a young kid that, like, this guy had superpowers because this meteor came down. And it's so funny because, like, especially nowadays, like, with all this, like, all the race hustling that's out there, I didn't realize it, back when I was growing up, like, race wasn't an issue with anything, which is, like, it's so stupid how like they've brought it back, like, nowadays, because everybody's trying to race hustle all this bullshit. But I used to watch that movie, and I'd watched it 100 times. I watched it literally probably over 100 times within a span of a year or so. Every time we go to Safeway and you rent movies at Safeway, I would want to get the Meteor Man. And but I didn't realize that it was an all black cast. I had no idea up until, like, recently when I watched it. Like,
You're like, this is just an amazing movie.
I had no idea. Yeah, but it's like, it's one of those things where, like, being just a child and being innocent about those things, but also when it's not, like, propagated, like it is nowadays. But I mean, that's kind of a little bit off subject. But Meteor Man was always my favorite, just because I was just very into, like, superpowers again when I was a kid, and so I'd watched that movie a billion times, and haven't watched it for over 10 years probably now. But that was probably my number one favorite movie for a long period of my time, or period of my life. For 2025, I just want to be busy, man. Like, as busy as I possibly can. Like, this year was a great year for me. I got 2 wins, and financially that's perfectly fine for me, but I don't care about the money. I do care about the money. I care about the what it does for my family and what we're able to do, like I was saying. But I fight because I really enjoy fighting, so I just want to do more of that.
Yeah.
I literally only fought 2 times, and it was in 2024, and they were both first round finishes. So I fought less than 7 minutes in a year. I'm like, man, I want to fight. Like,
by the way, how many hours of training? Let's just take a ballpark, right? What do you train? 5 days a week, 6 days a week, 7 days a week?
I mean, with I would say I train basically every day.
Every day?
Yeah, 7 days a week.
7 days a week. Yeah. For an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours?
I would say it probably averages out to about around 3 hours, because I do, like, other things that I do a lot of running sometimes, but I incorporate that.
So let's say 330 days times 3 hours. Like, you trained over 1,000 hours. Yeah. For 7 total minutes of fighting. Fuck.
But I make a good bit of money to do that. So
no, that's what I'm saying. It's like the amount of effort for the output of like where you show up to, like, do your thing. Yeah, it's wild.
Well, that brings me back to that original point. It's like that we were talking about. It's like that's why I want to fight. Like, fighting is the fun part. Like, all this other stuff is like the mundane, like, get up, drink my coffee. And that's why I always say to the younger fighters too, you can't forget where you came from, or can't forget why you started doing this, because it becomes a job. It becomes I gotta drive to the gym, I gotta do pads with Eric, I gotta go grapple later, I gotta go do this, I gotta do that. We used to pay a gym to go get our butts kicked, people pay memberships to go do this. Like, now I get paid to do this. I can't think about it as a job. And so, but yeah, like, all those hours for 7 minutes. I'm trying to get more minutes in the cage. Obviously, I'm happy with it could have been 30 minutes. I could have done.
Yeah, it could have been 30 minutes and 2 losses, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, 7 minutes, 2 wins over good guys, that's fantastic. But I would have preferred 3 or 4 fights in this year. I'm hoping to get a fight early 2025. And so I can really, start to, get it every 3 months. It's like 3 to 4 months is like kind of where I want to be at. I don't want to be 5, 6, 7, 8 months, but we were talking about it even earlier. Is like there's a lot of guys on the UFC roster, with the Dana White Contender Series, the Tough, all the other side things that, and then just how more prevalent and mainstream that fighting has become. So many people are fighting now, and there's so many good kids all over the world that the roster just keeps getting more and more filled. But there's only so many weekends. They're basically every weekend already. So you can't add more weekends to the year,
right?
But there's more guys getting added to the roster every year. So it used to be where it was like you can get a fight within like 6, 7, 8 weeks, and now it feels like every time I get booked, unless it's semi short notice, it's like 3, maybe 4 months out. So I think it's starting to slow down on being able to get booked. So as soon as you fight, if you want to fight immediately, it's like you got to take something short notice, or you just got to get on your manager and be like, yo, I want to fight, and really push for that. And so I really want to try to get 3 fights this year. Win, lose, or draw, I don't care. I just want more fight time. Yeah. And then last question was,
like, are you a sports fan?
I watch a little football. I'm a Seahawks fan, obviously I'm from Washington.
Rough couple years.
Yeah, a bit rough. They've never really. I mean, they've had a couple of decent years, but I feel like that's how it is. Unless you're like one of the big, unless you're like a Chiefs fan or you're like or like a Patriots fan from back when Brady was around. Like, unless you're like a couple of teams fans, like, you're always going to have a lot of rough years. You know?
Dude, let me tell you how spoiled I am. So I grew up in LA.
Yeah.
So I'm a diehard. I don't watch nearly as many sports anymore. Lakers fan, Dodgers fan.
Yeah.
But then my dad's from Pittsburgh, so Pittsburgh Steelers fan. Yeah. And then LA Kings. And then I was a UCLA fan, which they've been good-ish about 20 years ago. Yeah. And then my dad was a crazy USC fan. Yeah. So like in our household, USC, sometimes UCLA, the Lakers, the Kings, the Dodgers, the Steelers. Like, I've never, ever gone a year in my entire life where at least one of my teams, like, we're making a deep run in the playoffs. Yeah. And then I talked to some poor bastard from, like, Cleveland, and they're like, yeah, we had 2 good years with LeBron and 1 good year in my entire life as a football team. And I'm like, yeah, your time as a sports fan sucks. Yeah. I've been totally spoiled as a sports fan.
Well, we were... growing up, my dad was a big Seattle Sonics fan.
Yeah.
And
was that back in the Sean Kemp days?
Oh yeah. And huge fan, Gary Payton, all those guys. And they ended up moving to Oklahoma City, and they became the Thunder. But Seattle never got a professional basketball league after that. Oh. So like we were Seattle fans, and then like we kind of became Thunder fans, even though like we don't know shit about Oklahoma City, like, right. But like there was the Seahawks, or it was the old Sonics. So we're fans of them. But yeah, it kind of sucks because Seattle doesn't have an NBA team anymore. I haven't had one for a while, but I'm not super deep like you. Like we were talking before we got on the podcast. Like I'm like one of the worst people about following things. Like I'm a fan of some things, but I'm a fan of like a bunch of different things, but not like really too in depth with it. I'm just really I really enjoy less of that kind of stuff. That's why I like to run. I like to ride my bike a lot. I like to do things that kind of free my mind from that social contagion. Like it's so easy to just dive onto your phone for hours and hours, and I find myself doing that a lot. Running, 10 plus miles will take a few hours off your day where you're not on your phone, where you're just free thinking and you're just kind of just doing what's in the moment. That's why I like fighting as well, because even training it kind of puts you in the moment. Like when you're sparring guys, you have to be on edge and you got to be worried about what they're doing and what you're doing. And I feel like the average person doesn't have that kind of like fight or flight feeling. And I have it every day. So like I'm kind of an adrenaline junkie, and I feel like this is why I like to fight. But the comparison between the mundane person nowadays versus like an athlete like what I do is kind of that being able to disconnect from all that social stuff. Like obviously, like before social media was a thing, nobody really had that issue. But nowadays you see these, you see kids coming up and you see people so dived in on their phone. I mean, I talk to people sometimes, obviously we're doing a podcast, so we're like in front of each other talking. So like,
right.
But this is like rare.
This is rare. Usually I would have checked my phone 19 times by now.
Exactly. I mean, like I'll talk to people that, are friends of mine, and we'll be having a beer, we'll, be hanging out, drinking, or having dinner or something. And, it's hard to get their attention because they're on their phone or something. And you're like, people are so disconnected with actual real life because, the social media is actually antisocial when you really think about it, And so for me to try to disconnect myself with certain things that I do, is really what I enjoy doing. So doing less of that kind of stuff, like being a fan of sports is only just more time consuming, you know, more watching the TV. I do, you know, getting older and more mature, I do kind of find myself falling into those things where I do like watching football. Like, I don't know why, I just like watching dudes fucking beat each other up. I don't know what it is. But, you know, I think it adds to a bit more of that social media, you know, TV time. And I really just, you know, I find myself getting, you know, kind of falling into that every once in a while. And so that's why I do try to get out, and like running is my favorite thing to do. Like I ran today, you know, sparring guys is a fun thing to do. Grappling is one of my favorite things to do.
People ask me about that. They're like, dude, at 45, like, why do you enjoy jiu-jitsu? I'm like, look, win or lose, which 99% of the time is lose against somebody like Mike Lady or Tom Lawler. You know, Mike Lady's one of the guys that teaches the morning class. You know, he's a 230-pound bowling ball. He's just a scary dude. And it is impossible to think about anything else but jiu-jitsu in that moment. It's almost like meditation, where it's like every morning for an hour and 40 minutes, I start my day where I can't look at my phone. I'm just zoned in on this thing. I'm not worried about the loan file. I'm not worried about my wife is mad at me, or if Gabriel's not doing well in school or something. You just can be present with what you're doing. And that's really lacking in modern society.
Well, 100%. I mean, like, there's so many times where, like, even like I'll find myself doing it where it's like, okay, you're watching TV and then the ad comes on or whatever. It says, you know, 90-second ad. So it's a minute and a half. You find yourself grabbing your phone for 90 seconds. So you're telling me you can't even stand 90 seconds without some sort of stimulation and some sort of video or some sort of bullshit that you're not even going to remember, you know?
Right.
It's just something to pass the time, but you're so, nowadays it's just like people get so bored of actual life that it's like, it feels so good sometimes, because I like to go, like I was telling you, I like to go run down to Gold Strike, the hot springs. And at the bottom of Gold Strike hot springs, you're basically looking up, you're probably about a couple football fields away from the Hoover Dam. And then you're just you're basically in a big, it's the Colorado River. You're in a huge kind of, what would you call it? Just kind of mountains on the side, but like you're in a crevasse, like running down it. And then you get to the bottom of it and it just kind of opens up. And it's like one of those things where I'm just like, I got my music playing and stuff, but I'm just kind of just taking it in. And it's just one of those things that's just, I've been down there a million times, but every time I go down there, it's just like, it's almost like a decompression. Like everything's just like, I'm just relaxed down here. And, you know, I feel like people just, especially nowadays, like just 90% of the regular person going to and from work, seeing their kids at home, it's like, it's nonstop, just activity going on. It's like almost like when a TV's like got that white and black fuzziness, like your head just like you can't even think about anything because there's so much coming at you at all times. Like it's just nice to get really just deviate from that.
That's awesome, man. Well, hey, I've loved talking to you. We'll have you back on the podcast after your next win. And, man, just congratulations, one, on your success, and then two, just the longevity, man. 51 fights, that's a lot of fights. There's not a lot of human beings that can say that. So congrats, man.
I appreciate you, Scott.
Thanks
Thank you for having me on.